I remember the first night I ever spent inside that little county jail. It was the kind of place you drove past 100 times without noticing. A square brick building tucked behind the courthouse, no taller than 2 stories, with iron bars on only a few windows. It didn't look dangerous. It didn't even look like much of a jail. But when they locked me inside, I felt the weight of something I can't explain, like the air itself got heavier the second the doors shut. The holding cell they put me in smelled of bleach and something older, something sour that clung to the concrete. The walls were gray, painted so many times that you could see layers of old colors peeking through, chipped and flaking. There was a steel toilet in the corner, no lid, and a bench welded to the wall that was supposed to be my bed. I wasn't much of a criminal. A bar fight, too many beers, a bad temper, that was all. But the deputy who processed me acted like I was already guilty of something worse. He didn't say much. Just shoved me in, turned the key, and left me with my thoughts. That first night, I learned small-town jails don't have the constant noise you see in movies. There weren't inmates yelling or banging on bars. There weren't guards patrolling every few minutes. It was quiet, too quiet. I sat there trying to settle in, telling myself I'd only be there overnight. But the silence had a weight to it, pressing down on me, making every tiny sound feel sharp. I could hear my own heartbeat, my breathing, the faint hum of a fluorescent light somewhere down the hall. And then, underneath it all, I heard something else. Drip. At first, I thought it was the toilet. I leaned close, checked the bowl, even put my hand near the base to feel for water. Nothing. The floor was dry. Drip. It was steady, almost like a clock ticking. I pressed my ear against the bars, trying to figure out where it was coming from. It wasn't in my cell. It was down the row, 4 cells away. Cell 4. I couldn't see that far in the dim light, but I could hear it clear as day. Drip, drip, drip. The sound burrowed into me, made it hard to think about anything else. I kept telling myself it was just a leak. Old buildings have leaks. Pipes sweat. Water finds cracks. That's normal. But the longer I listened, the more I realized it didn't sound like a normal leak. It was too heavy, too thick. Each drop hit like something falling into a pool, echoing off walls. And it never sped up, never slowed down. Just the same rhythm, like it was being timed. I tried to sleep, but the drip wouldn't let me. It was in my ears, in my head. I turned on my side, pressed my hands over my ears, even hummed to myself, but nothing drowned it out. At some point, I stood and yelled down the hallway, "Hey, you got a leak down here!" My voice echoed, but no one came. The deputies must have been in the office upstairs. Or maybe they just didn't care. Drip. I sat back down, staring into the dark. My eyes adjusted after a while, enough to see the faint outlines of the bars, the dull shine of the floor. I kept staring toward where cell 4 should have been, even though I couldn't make it out. My mind filled in the blank space with things I didn't want to think about. Shapes in the dark, shadows shifting. Eventually, I heard movement. Not from the guards, not from the halls, from inside the cell block itself. It was faint, like someone shifting on a bed. A creak of metal, a low shuffle of feet against concrete. I froze, my breath catching in my throat. "Hello?" I whispered. No answer. Just the drip, steady and patient. The hairs on my arms stood straight. I wasn't sure if I'd imagined it, but the air felt colder, like the temperature had dropped a few degrees in minutes. My breath fogged a little when I exhaled. That shouldn't have happened in a heated building. I told myself it was my nerves, my brain playing tricks, but deep down I knew what I was hearing. Someone or something was in cell 4. I leaned against the bars, squinting down the row, hoping to catch movement, some shape in the dark. All I saw was the faint glint of water on the floor, like a puddle reflecting the dim light. That didn't make sense. The deputies had walked me past those cells earlier. The floors were dry, polished even. But now, from that direction, I saw a shimmer, like water slowly spreading. Drip. The sound grew louder. Not closer exactly, but sharper, as if it knew I was listening. Each drop echoed in my skull, shaking loose memories I didn't want. Childhood nights staring at ceilings, listening to faucets that wouldn't shut off, waiting for something to crawl out of the bathroom mirror. I backed away from the bars and sat against the wall, pulling my knees up. I didn't want to admit it, but I felt safer not looking. Still, the drip followed me. No matter how I covered my ears, no matter how I turned my head, it was inside me, dripping in my chest, my stomach, my thoughts. I don't know how long I sat there. Minutes, maybe hours. At some point, I must have dozed because I woke to the sound of keys jingling and a guard's footsteps echoing down the hall. The overhead lights buzzed on, blinding me for a moment. The deputy walked past my cell, not looking at me, not saying a word. He went all the way down to cell 4 and stopped. My heart pounded. I wanted to ask him what was in there if he heard the dripping too, but the words caught in my throat. He just stood there facing the bars of cell 4, keys dangling in his hand. I swear I saw his shoulders slump like he was listening to someone. Then, just as quick, he turned, walked back, and climbed the stairs. Never looked at me once. When the lights went out again, the dripping returned. Drip. I lay down on the bench, staring at the ceiling. My eyes burned from exhaustion, but I couldn't sleep. That sound kept me awake all night, burrowing into my bones. By morning, when the deputies came to take me to arraignment, the floor down by cell 4 was dry again. No puddle, no shimmer, but I knew what I'd heard. And I knew that first night wasn't just about getting locked up. Something else had locked itself inside me. The drip followed me long after they let me out. Even now, years later, in the silence of my own bedroom, sometimes I hear it, drip, drip, drip. When they brought me back after court, I thought maybe I'd imagined everything from that first night. I wanted to believe it was just my nerves, that I'd been half asleep, letting my mind play tricks. But the second they walked me past cell 4, I knew it wasn't in my head. The smell hit me first. It wasn't strong at the start. Just a faint sourness like old mop water left sitting too long. But there was something heavier beneath it, a thickness in the air that made me swallow hard. I slowed down, even though the deputy nudged me forward. He didn't notice it. Or if he did, he didn't care. They put me back in my cell, 2 doors down from that empty one. I sat on the bench, staring down the row. Everything looked normal. Gray bars, concrete floor, a dim light buzzing overhead. But the smell lingered, crawling into my nose and clinging to the back of my throat. I tried to ignore it. Ate the tray they slid under the bars, some kind of beans, bread, and meat I couldn't identify. But every bite tasted like that smell. Sour, heavy, wrong. By nightfall, the odor grew worse. It wasn't just mop water anymore. It was sharper, metallic, like rust. Or blood, I called out when the guard did his rounds. "Hey, you don't smell that?" He stopped, looked at me like I was crazy, then sniffed the air. "Smells fine." I shook my head. "It's coming from down there. From 4. His face tightened for just a second, almost like a flinch. But then he smirked. "Nobody's in 4. Hasn't been for years. Then what's leaking?" I asked. "Nothing's leaking." His voice got sharp like I'd crossed a line. "You worry about yourself, not that cell." He walked off, boots echoing on the concrete, leaving me with the stench. I lay back on the bench, pulling my shirt up over my nose. Didn't help. The smell only grew stronger as the night dragged on, filling every breath. At some point, I forced myself to stand and press my face against the bars, staring down the row. That's when I saw it. A dark stain spreading across the floor outside cell 4. It was slick, like oil, and it crept out slow, inch by inch, until it reached almost halfway across the hallway. Under the dim light, it glistened thick and black. My stomach twisted. I knew it wasn't water. The way it spread, the way it clung, it reminded me of something else. "Blood!" I yelled again. Banged on the bars until my hands hurt. No one came. When the lights cut out for the night, I sat there in the dark staring at that spreading stain, breathing in that choking smell. Sleep never came. At some point, maybe hours later, I heard movement again. A shuffle, a creak, the faint sound of chains dragging across concrete. I wanted to tell myself it was another inmate, but I knew I was the only one on that block. The rest of the cells were empty. The sound stopped in front of cell 4. Then came the dripping, drip, drip, drip. Only this time, it wasn't water I imagined falling. In my mind, each drop hit the floor with a splash of dark liquid, feeding that growing stain. The smell was unbearable. My eyes watered, my throat burned. I buried my face in my hands, whispering to myself, "It's not real. It's not real. It's not real." But when I opened my eyes, the dark shape on the floor had grown even bigger. It was almost at my cell now. I pressed myself against the far wall. Heart racing, every muscle locked. Then, just as suddenly, the smell began to fade. The stain shrank. Slowly, it pulled back toward cell 4, inch by inch, until the floor looked dry again. The dripping stopped. Silence. I sat there, shaking, staring at the empty floor. When the morning shift came, I expected to see a puddle, or at least stains left behind, but there was nothing. The concrete looked clean, almost too clean, like it had just been scrubbed. One of the new deputies brought breakfast. I asked him, careful this time, not wanting to sound insane, "Hey, what's in cell 4? He glanced down the row, then back at me. His face went pale, and for a second I thought he might actually answer. But then he set the tray down and muttered, "Eat your food." The way he walked off fast and stiff told me more than words ever could. That day, I couldn't stop thinking about it. The smell, the stain. The way the guards pretended it wasn't there. I started watching them. Every time one of them passed cell 4, their eyes flicked that way, just for a split second. Some sped up their steps. One even crossed himself under his breath. Nobody wanted to talk about it. But all of them knew, and I was stuck there, 2 cells away, breathing it in. By the second night, I thought maybe I'd gotten used to it. The smell hadn't been as strong all day, and the floor had stayed dry. I let myself hope it had just been my imagination, or a dream, or some trick of exhaustion. But when the lights clicked off and the hum of the building settled, I smelled it again, stronger than before. It rolled in like a fog, thick and choking. I gagged, my stomach twisting, bile rising in my throat. It wasn't just sour anymore. It was rot. The reek of meat left in the sun, of something dead left to fester. I stumbled to the bars, gasping, desperate for clean air. My hands gripped the iron so hard my knuckles turned white. That's when I saw the stain return. Not creeping this time. Pouring. It spilled out of cell 4 in a steady stream. Thick and black, spreading across the hall faster than before. It glistened in the dim light like oil, like tar, like something alive. I swear I saw it move against gravity. Climbing a little up the wall before dripping back down, and the smell. God. The smell was so thick it coated my tongue. I screamed for the guards, but no one came. The stain crept closer, foot by foot, inch by inch, until it reached the bars of my cell. I stumbled back, pressing myself against the wall, hands shaking. I couldn't breathe. My chest felt heavy, like the air itself was rotting inside me. The blackness seeped under my bars, just enough to touch the tips of my boots. And then, it stopped. Like it was testing me. I don't remember what happened after that. My memory blurs, my head went light. Maybe I passed out. Maybe I just froze for hours. All I know is that when the lights came on for morning, the floor was spotless. Not a drop, not a mark, but the smell stayed with me. In my hair, in my clothes, in my skin. And I knew one thing for certain. Cell 4 wasn't empty. It had never been empty. The storm came on my 3rd night. It started with a low rumble, like the sky was warning us before it split open. The rain hammered against the roof, echoing through the jail like rolling drums. Every window rattled, and every gust of wind shoved itself through cracks in the building, making the whole place moan. I thought maybe the storm would help me sleep. The sound of rain was steady, almost calming compared to the silence that usually haunted me. But then the drip returned. Drip. Even with the storm raging, I heard it. Clear as day. Louder than ever. Drip. I sat up, heart pounding. The sound wasn't muffled anymore. It wasn't hiding under the silence. It was proud now, insistent, beating against my ears like it wanted my attention. The smell came next. Damp and sour, stronger than ever. I pressed my sleeve over my nose, but it didn't matter. The air itself was wet with it. I pushed myself to the bars and looked down the row towards cell 4. And that's when I saw it. Water. At first, it was just a dark shimmer on the floor. But then the light from the hallway flickered, and I realized the water wasn't pooling outside the cell. It was seeping out from underneath the bars. I blinked, thinking maybe it was the storm. Maybe rain had leaked in somehow, but it made no sense. The jail was sealed. No open windows, no broken roof, and the water wasn't spreading like a normal puddle. It was pouring, steady and thick, sliding across the concrete. It didn't move like water. It moved like something alive. The storm outside roared, lightning flashing white across the hallway for just a split second. In that flash, I saw the impossible. Cell 4 was full. I swear to God, in that brief light, I saw the water level inside, rising, pressing against the bars from the inside like the whole room was an aquarium. And then the dark swallowed it again. I backed away from my bars, breath caught in my throat. My skin prickled, cold sweat running down my back. The water outside cell 4 spread wider, inch by inch, until it reached the middle of the block. It reflected the dim bulb overhead, a sickly yellow sheen across the surface, and the drip never stopped. Drip, drip, drip. But it wasn't just dripping anymore. It was pouring. Like the sound of a faucet turned on full, slapping against concrete. I yelled for the guards, voice cracking. "Hey, do you see this?" But no one came. The storm outside masked everything. My voice, the pounding rain, the rumble of thunder, it all drowned together. The water crept closer. I pressed myself against the back wall of my cell, heart racing, staring as the flood seeped closer to my boots. My socks were already damp from the thin trickle that had reached me, but now it came faster, stronger, and yet, when I looked down at my feet, nothing was there. The floor was bone dry. But when I looked back toward cell 4, I saw it. The flood spreading. I could see it. I could smell it. But when I reached down, my hand touched nothing but cold concrete. It wasn't real. Or maybe it was, but only to me. I pressed my palms to my head, whispering to myself, "You're losing it. You're just losing it." But the water kept coming. In another flash of lightning, the hallway lit up bright, and I saw the level inside cell 4 again. It was halfway up the bars now, rippling like a tank about to burst, and something was moving in it, a shape, a dark, slow shape, drifting just below the surface. I stumbled back, tripped over the bench, and hit the wall hard. Pain shot up my spine, but I barely felt it. My eyes locked on that cell, waiting for the next flash. When it came, I wished I hadn't looked. The shape wasn't just moving, it was pressing against the bars from the inside. A face, pale, bloated, mouth open wide, bubbles leaking out, eyes clouded white. Then the light died, and it was gone. The drip grew louder. Drip, drip, drip. The water outside the cell was rushing now, flowing like a river down the hall. I could see it moving fast, splashing against the concrete, reaching every corner. It should have soaked my legs by then. I should have been wading in it, but my cell was still dry. I sank down against the bench, shaking, every breath shallow. My chest hurt, like I was drowning without touching the water. For hours, maybe minutes, maybe forever, I sat there, watching the flood spread. Watching it rise against the invisible barrier between me and it. At some point, I heard the sound change. No longer dripping, no longer pouring. It was crashing. Like waves slamming against rock, cell 4 was filling, and it wanted more room. Another lightning flash lit the hall. This time, the water inside cell 4 was at the top of the bars. It should have spilled over, should have burst out and drowned the whole block. But it didn't. It just sat there, pressed tight, rippling like it was waiting, and in that water, I saw more faces. Not just one. Dozens. Men. Women. Their mouths open in silent screams. Hair floating, arms reaching for the surface. Then the dark returned, and I was alone again. I pressed my hands over my face, rocking back and forth, whispering, "It's not real. It's not real. It's not real." But when the storm finally died, when the thunder faded and the rain eased into silence, the dripping stopped too. I dared to open my eyes. The hallway was dry. Cell 4 looked the same as it always did. Dark, empty, silent. No water. No faces, no flood, but my clothes were damp. My hair was wet. My skin felt cold, clammy, as if I'd been pulled out of a lake. When the morning shift came, the deputy walked the row, yawning, sipping coffee. He looked at me and his eyes narrowed. "You all right?" he asked. I wanted to scream at him, to demand answers, to tell him what I saw. But when I opened my mouth, only a croak came out. My throat burned raw and dry. The deputy frowned. "You sound like you've been yelling all night." I hadn't. I couldn't. I just stared at him, shaking my head. He shrugged and walked on, never glancing at cell 4. But I did, and when I looked close enough, I swore I saw a drop of water slide down one of the bars, drip. When you're locked up in a small-town jail, you learn real quick that every little favor comes with a price. I wasn't some career criminal. I'd just gotten myself caught in a mess of bad decisions. But I'd been there long enough that the deputies started trusting me with little jobs. They called it trustee duty. Most guys hated it, but to me it felt like freedom. Anything that got me out of that cell, even for an hour, was worth it. That's how I ended up in the evidence room. The deputy told me it hadn't been cleaned in years. Just boxes stacked on boxes, shelves stuffed with papers, old bags of clothes, tools, even broken furniture. Dust everywhere. "Go in there, sweep it up, wipe down the shelves," he said. "Don't touch what's sealed. Don't ask questions. Just clean," I nodded. Didn't argue. You don't argue when they give you space outside your cell. The evidence room was on the far end of the building, down a hallway that smelled like mildew and old paper. The door groaned when it opened, and for a second I thought I was walking into a tomb. The air inside was stale, thick with dust. The single light bulb overhead flickered, buzzing like it was ready to die. Boxes towered in uneven stacks, some so old the cardboard sagged. Yellowed envelopes poked out between them. Bags marked with case numbers were shoved into corners. It wasn't organized like a real evidence locker. It was more like a storage closet no one wanted to admit existed. I started sweeping. Dust rolled across the floor in gray clouds, clinging to my clothes, my face, my throat. I coughed, wiped my mouth with the back of my hand, and kept going. That's when I noticed the ledger. It was sitting on the corner of a metal desk pushed against the far wall. Big, leather-bound, heavier than it looked. The cover was cracked with age, dark brown, edges curled. No labels, no lock, just a book. I shouldn't have opened it. I know that now, but the second I saw it, my hands moved on their own. The first page was filled with names, neat handwriting in black ink, one after another, stretching down the page in a perfect list. Beside each name was a date. No notes, no charges, no details. Just names and dates. I flipped forward. More names. Pages and pages of them. Some written darker as if pressed hard into the paper. Others faded, barely visible. Halfway through, I noticed something strange. Certain names were crossed out. Not neatly, not with a line through them. They were slashed, sometimes over and over, gouged into the page so deep it tore the paper. My chest tightened as I read, because I recognized one Dale Pearson. He'd been in the cell block my first week there. Old guy, didn't talk much. Couple of nights later, he was gone. Guards said he'd been transferred. Rumor was he'd had a heart attack, but his name was there. Dale Pearson, crossed out. I flipped back a few pages, heart racing. Another name I knew, Jason Holbrook. He'd been brought in drunk one night, yelling so loud they'd shoved him in isolation. The next morning, he was dead. Choked on his own vomit, they'd said. His name was there, too. Crossed out so violently the ink tore the page clean through. I slammed the book shut, my hands shaking. The room was too quiet. I could hear my own breathing, my own pulse in my ears. I told myself it was just some old record. Maybe it was just a list of inmates, nothing more. Maybe the crossings out were just the sheriff's way of keeping track of who'd been released or transferred. But I didn't believe that. Not really. The ledger didn't feel like paperwork. It felt like something else. Like a tally. The light bulb flickered overhead, buzzing louder. For a second, the whole room went dark, and in that darkness, I swear I heard something move. A shuffle of paper. A faint scratch of pen on paper. I spun around, but nothing had changed. Boxes. Dust. Silence. Still, I couldn't shake the thought. I wasn't supposed to see that book. I put it back exactly where I found it, closed tight, spine facing forward. I swept the floor faster, eager to finish, eager to get out. But the whole time I felt it behind me, like the ledger was watching me. When the deputy came to check on me, I almost told him. Almost asked what the book was, but the words stuck in my throat. His eyes flicked to the desk just for a second, and I knew. He knew it was there. He knew what I'd seen, and he didn't want me talking about it. Back in my cell, I couldn't stop thinking about those names. The way they were written so carefully, so orderly. The way some were slashed out like an act of anger. That night, I lay on the bench, staring at the ceiling, whispering the names I remembered under my breath. Dale Pearson, Jason Holbrook Deadman, both crossed out. I thought maybe if I ignored it, I could forget. But when the lights went out, I swore I smelled ink. Fresh ink, sharp, metallic, bleeding through the air. And beneath the hum of the jail, I thought I heard pages turning. I didn't sleep much that night. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw the ledger again. That thick book, those long lists of names. But it wasn't just the names. It was the way they were crossed out. Not neat, not tidy, violent. Like whoever did it had been angry or desperate. Some were scribbled over until the paper ripped apart. Some looked carved, pressed into the page as if the pen tip had cut through flesh, not paper. And I kept thinking about the ones I knew. Dale Pearson, Jason Holbrook, both gone in strange ways. Both crossed out. By morning, my stomach was knotted so tight I could barely eat. But I forced down the bland oatmeal they gave us. I knew if I started looking weak, if I started letting my nerves show, the other inmates would smell blood. Still, I couldn't shake it. When I got trustee duty again, I almost hoped they'd send me anywhere else. Laundry, kitchen, even scrubbing toilets would have been better. But no. The deputy dropped me off at the evidence room like before. Same hallway, same mildew smell, same flickering bulb, and the ledger was still there. It hadn't moved an inch. Still on the desk, cover closed. Waiting for me, I told myself I wouldn't touch it. That I'd sweep, mop, dust, and get out. But every time I bent down or moved past the desk, my eyes slid toward it. The way it sat there. It didn't feel forgotten. It felt planted, placed where I could see it. After 20 minutes, my curiosity chewed through my self-control. I gave up. I pulled the chair out, sat down, and dragged the ledger closer. The leather creaked as I opened it again. More names. More pages! Row after row, written so neatly it almost looked printed. And then more crossings out. Harsh black slashes. Ink pressed so deep it had bled through to the next page. I ran my finger down the list until I stopped on another name I knew. Earl McKinney. I froze. Earl had been in my block just a few weeks earlier. Big guy. Tattoos up his arms. He'd been in and out of jail his whole life. Everyone knew him. He wasn't the kind of man who broke down easy. But I remembered the night he died. The guard said he hung himself with a bed sheet. But none of us believed it. Earl wasn't the type to give up like that. And if he had, we would have heard something. A struggle, a shout, something. Instead, he was just gone. One day alive, the next day gone, and here he was, Earl McKinney. His name slashed out so hard the paper was nearly shredded. My throat went dry. I turned the pages faster now, heart thudding. More names, dozens of them. Maybe hundreds. Some I didn't recognize, some I did. But the pattern was the same. People who vanished. People who died mysteriously. People who never made it past those walls, all crossed out. It wasn't just a list of inmates, it was a death list, a record of everyone who'd gone into this jail and never come out alive. I don't know how long I sat there staring at those names, but eventually I heard the hallway door open. The sound jolted me so bad I nearly dropped the book. I slammed it shut and stood up, sweeping dust off my pants like I'd been busy cleaning the whole time. The deputy stepped in. His eyes flicked to the desk, quick, sharp. He didn't say a word, but I could tell. He knew I'd looked. When I went back to my cell, the others noticed something was off. "You look sick." "Man," one of them said. I muttered something about bad food, but I could feel their eyes on me, suspicious. Prisoners can smell fear, and I was reeking of it. That night, it got worse. I was lying there in the dark when I heard it again. That faint sound of pages turning. Soft, steady. Coming from the hallway, maybe from the evidence room itself. I pressed my ear to the bars, straining to hear. And then, just faint enough that I almost thought I imagined it. The scratch of a pen. Slow, deliberate. Writing, I backed away. Heart hammering. But even when I crawled back to my bunk, the smell came again. Ink, thick, metallic, seeping into the air. And I dreamed. I dreamed I was sitting at that desk, the ledger open in front of me. My hands weren't mine anymore. They were bigger, older, veins bulging, and they were holding a pen. I was writing names one by one in that same neat script, and when I finished a page, I'd take the pen and slash one name out, over and over until the paper tore. I woke up shaking, sweat dripping down my back. But the worst part wasn't the dream. The worst part was that I could still see the name I'd slashed in my dream. It wasn't Dale, or Jason, or Earl. It was mine. My name. Written in that careful script. Crossed out so hard the ink bled through the page. I sat there in the dark, gripping the edge of the bunk so tight my knuckles went white, and I knew the ledger wasn't just a record of the past. It was keeping track of the present. And maybe the future. I tried to tell myself it was just a dream. That's what sane people do, right? You wake up, you shake it off, you tell yourself it was your brain playing tricks. But no matter how many times I repeated it, I couldn't convince myself, because every detail was too sharp, too exact. I could still see the ink on the page, still smell it in the back of my throat, still feel the way the pen cut through my own name. By breakfast, my hands wouldn't stop shaking. One of the guys in my block asked if I was dope sick. I told him to mind his own business, but inside I was crumbling. I needed to see the ledger again. I hated the thought, but it gnawed at me like a rat in the walls. I had to know if my name was really in there, if what I dreamed wasn't just a dream. That afternoon, like fate was mocking me, they sent me back to trustee duty in the evidence room. Same deputy, same look in his eyes when he left me alone. Like he already knew where I'd go the second the door shut. I didn't waste time pretending. The broom clattered against the wall, forgotten. My hands went straight to the ledger. The leather felt colder this time, like it had been waiting. I pulled it open, flipping fast through the pages. My heart dropped when I saw it. There it was. My name, written in that perfect, neat script. The ink looked fresh, darker than the others, like it hadn't fully dried. And it was slashed through again and again until the paper nearly tore. I staggered back from the desk, my legs weak. My chest felt hollow, like the air had been punched out of me. But as I stood there, gasping, I noticed something worse. There were new names. I turned the pages slowly, hands trembling. Names I hadn't seen yesterday. I stopped when I recognized one, David Lewis. He was in the cell across from me. A loudmouth kid, barely 20, always joking too much, like laughter could cover up fear. His name was there now, written neat, not crossed out, just waiting. I flipped again. Another, Thomas Reed, a guy who played cards with us every night, humming old country songs under his breath. His name was there too, and more. Names of men I'd eaten breakfast with just hours earlier. Names of people still alive. The list wasn't just recording the dead. It was writing the living, and one by one, I realized it was deciding. I slammed the book shut. But the echo felt wrong in that little room, like it traveled farther than the walls should allow. My skin prickled, and I couldn't shake the thought that someone was listening. Not someone outside the door, someone inside the pages. When the deputy came to collect me, he glanced at the desk again. His mouth twitched like he almost wanted to say something, but he didn't. He just locked the door and led me back to my block. That night, I couldn't keep quiet anymore. I leaned against the bars, whispering to David Lewis. "Hey," I said. "Your name's in that book," he frowned. "What book?" "The one in the evidence room. The ledger. It's got a list of names, inmates, dead ones. And now yours." He laughed, shook his head. "Man, you've been locked up too long. You're losing it." But I could tell behind the smirk, his eyes darted. Uneasy. like a part of him believed me even if he didn't want to. I almost told Thomas Reed too, but something stopped me. Maybe fear, maybe shame, maybe I didn't want them all to think I was cracking up. Instead, I lay there in the dark, staring at the ceiling, listening. And sure enough, the sound came again, pages turning, slow, steady. And then the pen, scratching, deliberate, pulling names out of the air and pinning them down like insects. I covered my ears, but it didn't help. The sound wasn't in the room, it was in me. When I finally slept, the dreams came back. This time I wasn't writing. I was standing against the wall while someone else sat at the desk, a shadow. The shape of a man in a wide-brimmed hat, shoulders hunched as he wrote. I couldn't see his face, but his hand was steady, sharp, never pausing. He turned the page and I leaned closer, trying to see what he'd written. And then I saw them. David Lewis, Thomas Reed, names in black ink, waiting. The shadow lifted the pen and pressed it down against David's. One stroke, then another, then another. The sound of tearing paper echoed like thunder. I woke with a scream stuck in my throat. The next morning, the cell block was too quiet. Everyone shuffled to breakfast like usual, but one seat was empty, David Lewis's. I asked where he was. A guard muttered that he'd been found dead in the night. No one knew how. I did. I sat there, staring down at the gray slop on my tray, my hands shaking so bad I couldn't hold the spoon. The ledger wasn't just keeping track. It was writing the future, and no one could stop it. After David Lewis died, I stopped pretending I was imagining things. The ledger was real. The names were real. And whatever was writing them, it was stronger than anyone inside this place. I avoided trustee duty after that. I made excuses, said I was sick, limped around, even faked a cough until my throat was raw. Some days it worked, some days it didn't. But no matter what I did, sooner or later, they always sent me back to that evidence room. The book was always waiting. I never wanted to open it again, but it felt like a magnet pulling me toward it. My eyes couldn't help but slide to the desk, to the cracked leather cover, and each time I told myself I'd just glance, just a peek to prove it wasn't as bad as I feared. But every time I opened it, more names had appeared. Fresh ink, new inmates, men I'd seen in the yard that same morning. Men still laughing, eating, talking, all lined up neat on the page, waiting for their turn. And every time, a few of them were crossed out by the next day. It didn't matter what I did. I couldn't stop it. By then, sleep was impossible. I'd lie on my bunk, staring into the dark, listening to that faint sound of pen on paper. Each stroke echoed in my skull. Every scratch meant another life had been claimed. But the worst part came one afternoon when they sent me in again. The room smelled stronger this time. Not just dust and mildew, ink, thick, metallic, sharp. The smell wrapped around me the second I stepped inside. The ledger sat on the desk, almost daring me. I told myself I wouldn't touch it, but the air in there pressed against me until I couldn't breathe. My hands moved on their own. I sat down, pulled it open, and flipped straight to the back. The page was nearly empty, just a handful of names, the most recent ones, all written in that perfect hand. And then I saw it, my name, written clean and careful. Black ink still glistening faintly like it hadn't dried. The date was beside it, tomorrow. For a moment, my brain refused to accept what my eyes were seeing. I blinked, rubbed my face, even flipped the page back and forth like maybe I'd hallucinated it. But no, it was there, as solid as the paper it was written on. My stomach twisted, and I had to grip the desk to stop myself from falling. Tomorrow. Tomorrow I was going to die. I sat there shaking, staring at those letters until they blurred. My throat burned. My mind spun in circles. I thought about all the ways I could fight it, warn someone, beg the guards, even claw my way out of this place if I had to. But deep down, I knew none of that mattered. The ledger wasn't a record. It was a sentence. And once it was written, it couldn't be undone. When the deputy came to fetch me, I nearly begged him. The words pressed at the back of my throat, but when I looked into his eyes, I stopped. He knew. Of course he knew, and worse, he wasn't surprised. That night I didn't lie down. I couldn't. I sat on the edge of my bunk, rocking slightly, every muscle locked tight. The other guys talked, played cards, tried to kill the hours. I just sat there waiting. At lights out, the dark pressed in thick. My ears strained for it. And sure enough, I heard it again. The pages turning, the pen scratching. This time, I knew it was writing me. My breath caught and I covered my ears, but it didn't help. The sound wasn't out there, it was inside me. Each scratch of the pen tugged at my chest like it was carving the ink into my ribs. I pressed my face into my hands, whispering, "Please, not me. Please." But the sound didn't stop. When sleep finally dragged me under, the dream came back. I was in the evidence room, sitting at the desk again. The sheriff's ledger lay open in front of me. The shadow sat across from me, the man in the wide-brimmed hat, shoulders bent low. His hand moved steady across the page, the pen whispering in circles and lines. And then he stopped. Slowly, his head lifted. I couldn't see his face, just a blur of darkness where his features should be. He turned the ledger toward me. There was my name, tomorrow's date, and as I stared at it, his hand reached out, long fingers wrapping around mine, cold, heavy. He placed the pen in my grip and pushed it down to the page. My hand moved even though I didn't want it to. The pen dragged across my name. One line, then another, then another. The ink splattered, bled, tore through the paper. By the time I woke, my fingers were curled tight, cramped like I'd been holding a pen all night, and on my skin, faint but visible, were smudges of black ink. Tomorrow was today. Jail nights are bad enough when the lights are on. You've got the hum of the bulbs overhead, the clank of doors, the coughs, the snores, the endless echoes. It never really gets quiet, never really gets dark. That's what makes it bearable. There's always some sound to hold on to, some flicker of light to remind you that you're not buried alive. The night of the blackout, all of that was taken away. It started like nothing. The hallway lights blinked once, twice, then went out. The hum died, and for a second the silence pressed so hard against my ears it hurt. I thought it was just a flicker, just a glitch. But then the emergency lights didn't kick in, no backup, no faint red glow. It was pitch black. I couldn't even see my own hand when I lifted it in front of my face. Just dark, thick and suffocating, swallowing the block whole. At first the guys laughed, joked about it. Someone yelled, "Guess the county didn't pay the bill!" A few whistles, a few nervous chuckles, but the laughter didn't last. Because in the dark, time stretches. Seconds crawl into minutes, and the longer we sat there, the heavier the silence grew. Then we heard it. Footsteps. Slow, steady. Somewhere down the hallway, beyond the bars. The sound of boots on concrete. Heel-to-two, heel-to-two. Not rushing, just walking. Everyone went quiet. You could feel the air shift, the whole block holding its breath. "Guard?" Someone called. His voice cracked halfway through. The footsteps didn't answer. They just kept coming, each one deliberate, echoing closer, and then came the sound of keys, a faint jangle, metal on metal, bouncing against a hip or a belt. The sound of someone carrying a ring heavy with locks and doors. Only. We all knew the guards didn't wear keys like that. I'd seen them every day. They had electronic fobs, a few smaller keys, but not a whole jangling ring like you'd see in the movies. That sound didn't belong here. Someone whispered, "That ain't no CO." A shiver ran through me, so strong my teeth ached. The steps slowed, stopped, right outside our block. The silence that followed was worse than the sound itself. I strained my eyes against the dark, but nothing moved. No flicker, no shadow. Just black then, metal scraped against metal, a key sliding into a lock, the clunk of it turning. Every man in that block went still. You could hear hearts pounding, breath hitching, but no door opened. Another scrape, another key, a different lock. Turned, clicked, left hanging, one by one, every sound repeated. A key in a lock, a turn, a pause, moving down the line, testing each one, but our doors never opened. By the time it reached the last cell, my whole body was shaking. And then the footsteps started again. This time, moving away, heel to toe. Heel to toe, the keys rattling with each step, fading into the dark until the silence swallowed them whole. No one spoke for what felt like forever. Finally, someone whispered, "What the hell was that?" No one answered. When the lights came back on, it was sudden, blinding. We flinched, covered our faces. The hum of electricity filled the air again, sharp and loud after so much silence. The guards came storming down the hallway, barking questions, acting like nothing had happened. Power surge, they said. Just a glitch, but I saw their faces. The way they scanned the block, eyes darting to the doors, lingering on the locks like they were checking to see if any had been touched. They knew something was wrong. Later, when the block settled down, I sat on my bunk staring at the floor. The laughter and whispers had started again, the men trying to convince themselves it was nothing, but I couldn't shake the sound. Those footsteps, those keys. And the worst part wasn't that I'd heard them, it was that deep down, I knew they'd be back. When the lights snapped back on after the blackout, I thought the worst was over. The block buzzed with nervous voices, laughter that didn't sound real, men trying to shake it off. The kind of talk you use when you're scared but don't want to admit it. But the air didn't feel right. It was heavier somehow, charged, like the static you get before lightning. The hum of the lights returned, but it didn't chase away the silence underneath. Something was still sitting there with us. I tried to ignore it. I sat on my bunk listening to the guys argue about what we'd heard. Some swore it was a guard playing tricks, others said we imagined it. I wanted to believe either of those, but the sound of those keys was still ringing in my head. Too real to be a dream. Then the officers came for count. Count is routine. It happens 3 times a day, every day, like clockwork. They walk the block, check every cell, eyes on each body. It's mechanical, almost boring. But that night, as the officer stepped into the hallway, I noticed something different. He was walking slower. His eyes were darting back and forth like he didn't trust what he was seeing. He counted once, frowned, then counted again. I sat up straighter watching him. By the 3rd time, I could see sweat on his forehead. He stopped in the middle of the block, muttering under his breath, then turned and left. That's when the 2nd officer came. 2 guards for count. That didn't happen. Not unless something was wrong. They walked together, lips moving but voices low, checking each cell again. Their faces got tighter with every step, and then without a word, they both left. The block erupted with whispers. What the hell's going on? Why are they counting like that? Nobody knew. Nobody wanted to know. A few minutes later, the lieutenant showed up. He had the clipboard, his glasses sliding down his nose, his mouth a hard line. He didn't say anything either, just walked cell to cell, writing numbers down. When he finished, he just stood there staring at us. Not angry, not suspicious. Just unsettled, like he was looking at something that didn't belong, and then he left too. The door slammed and we were alone again. But the whispers didn't stop this time. They grew louder, sharper. Some guys were swearing, others were laughing, but none of it sounded right. It was like everyone was trying to cover up the same thought. There was one too many of us. I felt it before I believed it. Like a shadow sitting in the corner of my mind. I scanned the cells, faces I knew, voices I recognized. I'd been in this block long enough to know every man by sight. But that night, I couldn't shake the feeling that one face didn't fit. And then I saw him, cell 12. He was sitting on the lower bunk, his back straight, his hands folded in his lap. Not talking, not moving, just sitting there. I blinked. The guy above him was someone I knew, Mendez. Always loud, always cracking jokes. But this man below, I didn't know him. He looked like he'd always been there. Like he belonged, but I knew he didn't. His face was pale, washed out, almost gray under the harsh light. His hair was dark, wet-looking, like he'd just come in from the rain. His uniform didn't fit right, too loose around the collar, the sleeves hanging long, but the worst part was his eyes. They weren't focused on anything. Not the wall, not the bars, just straight ahead, like he was staring into a place none of us could see. I couldn't move. I wanted to shout, to call someone over, but the words stuck in my throat. Because deep down, I knew if I spoke, if I pointed him out, He might look back at me, and I didn't want that. The others noticed too, not all at once, but slowly. One by one, the whispers died. Men turned their heads toward cell 12, their voices trailing off, until the whole block was staring, but he didn't move, didn't blink. Just sat there, quiet, still, like he'd been waiting for us to notice. Hours passed. The guards never came back. Nobody said a word. Even Mendez, who never shut up, didn't look down at the man sharing his bunk. He just lay there, rigid, eyes glued to the ceiling. I tried to sleep, but every time I closed my eyes, I heard those footsteps again, that steady rhythm, hail tutu, hail tutu, and the jangle of keys echoing through the dark. When I opened my eyes, the man was still there. The night crawled by. I watched the shadows move across the walls as the lights flickered, buzzing low and weak. My stomach knotted tighter with every second, and then morning came. Count again. The guards moved fast this time, clipped and sharp, their voices tight. They didn't linger. They didn't recount. They just went through the motions and left. But I saw the look in the lieutenant's eyes when he paused outside cell 12. Just a flicker. Enough to tell me I wasn't imagining it. He saw him too. That's when I realized something I still can't shake. Whoever or whatever that man was, he wasn't hiding from them. He didn't have to, because he was supposed to be there, not on their paper, not on their lists. But in some deeper way I can't explain. Like the block had always been meant to hold him. And maybe one day it'll be meant to hold me too. The first thing I remember is the cold. Not the kind of cold you feel outside in the winter, where the wind bites your cheeks and your fingers go numb. This was different. This was a damp, heavy cold, like it was sinking through my skin and into my bones. I'd been drinking that night, too much like usual. One too many shots at the bar, one too many laughs with people I barely knew. I don't even remember why I got in the car. I just remember the flash of red and blue in my rearview mirror, the tight knot in my chest when the sirens wailed, and the way the officer's flashlight burned into my eyes. Next thing I knew, I was in cuffs. The ride to the county jail was short, but it felt endless. I kept trying to tell myself it wasn't a big deal, that I'd been through worse. A night in the tank, a fine, maybe some probation. I'd get out, go home, and forget it ever happened. That's what I told myself. But when they pushed me through those intake doors, I knew something was different. The air hit me first. It was colder than outside, colder than anywhere I'd ever been indoors. The kind of cold that made your breath puff out in little white clouds. I laughed nervously and asked the deputy if the heat was broken. He didn't answer. They took my shoelaces, my belt, emptied my pockets. The deputy shoved my things into a plastic tub and slid it across the counter. My hands were shaking, not from fear, but from the chill that seemed to cling to me like a wet blanket. Then he led me down a narrow hallway. The concrete walls were painted that dull, institutional gray, but they looked darker in that light, almost wet. The floor echoed with every step. My bare feet on the concrete felt like stepping on ice. When he opened the door to the holding tank, I expected to see other guys, drunks, troublemakers, maybe a couple of loudmouths sleeping it off. But it was empty. Just one long concrete bench against the wall, a toilet in the corner, and the air so cold it made my teeth chatter. The deputy pushed me in, shut the door, and walked away without a word. I sat down on the bench, hugging myself, rubbing my arms to make some kind of warmth. The chill wasn't normal. It didn't feel like bad heating. It felt deliberate, like the room itself was trying to freeze me out. I told myself it was just part of the punishment. Maybe they kept it cold on purpose to keep drunks from getting too comfortable. I tried to laugh at the thought, but my laugh sounded weak in that empty space. Minutes passed, or maybe hours. I don't know. Time moves strange in a place like that. I remember leaning forward, elbows on my knees, head in my hands, when I felt it. A faint brush of air on the back of my neck. I froze. It was subtle at first, like someone had opened a door behind me. A whisper of breath warm against my skin. My whole body went rigid. Slowly, I lifted my head, turned to look behind me. but the room was empty. Nothing but cinder block walls, a flickering light, and that damn toilet in the corner. I shook it off. Told myself it was my imagination. I'd been drinking, I was tired, and the cold was messing with me. That was all. But then it happened again. Stronger this time. A definite exhale right against the back of my neck. The kind of thing you only feel when someone is standing too close. I shot up from the bench, spinning around, my back pressed against the wall. My chest heaved, my breath puffing in the cold air. No one. Still no one. But I swear on my life, it felt like someone had just leaned down and breathed on me. I didn't sit after that. I stood pacing, trying to keep the blood moving in my body. My arms were gooseflesh, my lips numb. I kept telling myself I was fine, that I'd just sleep it off and laugh in the morning. But the thought kept creeping back. I wasn't alone. The third time it happened, I nearly screamed. I'd been pacing the length of the room, my feet slapping softly against the concrete, when I felt it again. Not on my neck this time. On my ear, a long, slow breath, like someone leaning close enough to whisper. I whipped around, hands out like I could shove someone back, but there was nothing there. Just the shadows stretching across the wall. That's when I noticed something I hadn't before. The shadows weren't right. The light in the tank came from a single bulb in the ceiling, but the way the shadows stretched, it didn't make sense. There was one that looked thicker than the rest, darker, almost like it had weight. It clung to the far corner unmoving, even when I shifted. I stared at it, my chest tight, my breath shallow. I told myself it was just the light flickering, just bad wiring. But the longer I looked, the more I swore it was shaped like a person, tall, thin, head tilted slightly as though it was watching me, my knees nearly buckled. I backed into the bench, hands gripping the edge until my knuckles turned white. I tried to shut my eyes, but every time I did, I felt that breath again, closer, longer. Like whoever, or whatever, was in that cell with me was leaning closer each time I blinked. I pressed my back flat against the wall, whispering to myself, begging the morning to come. I don't know how long I stayed like that. Could have been an hour, could have been all night. But I do remember this. When the deputy finally opened the door, the cold rushed out like smoke. He flinched like he'd walked into a freezer. I stumbled out, teeth chattering, body shaking. My skin felt clammy, wet with sweat, even though I was freezing. He gave me a strange look. Not the annoyed, tired look you expect from a deputy dealing with another drunk. This one was different, almost like he'd seen it before. He didn't say anything, just led me down the hall, his face stiff, his eyes straight ahead, and even though I was out of that tank, I couldn't shake it. The feeling of breath on my neck, the weight of someone standing just behind me, and that shadow in the corner, darker than all the rest. It followed me. Even now, when I close my eyes, I can still feel it breathing. When I sobered up the next morning, I thought maybe it had all been in my head. The breath on my neck, the shadows that didn't line up, the cold that cut straight through me. I tried to laugh it off as leftover whiskey and nerves, but even then, something didn't feel right. I'd only been in that tank one night, but my body felt like it had been there for weeks. My muscles ached, my skin prickled, and there was this low hum in my bones, like I'd been lying too close to a generator. The deputies barely looked at me when they let me out. One shoved a tray of food into my hands, the other pointed me toward a bench. No words, no small talk, just tight lips and quick glances, like they didn't want to linger near me. I wolfed the food down, not because I was hungry, but because it gave me something to do. My eyes kept drifting back toward that hallway, the one that led to the holding tank. Even in daylight, I swear I could feel that cold rolling out of there like smoke. That afternoon, they moved me back in. I protested. Told them the tank was freezing, told them I couldn't sleep, that the light flickered all night. They didn't care. One deputy shrugged and said, "It's just the tank. Everybody complains. Everybody complains." That stuck with me, because the way he said it, flat and final, told me this wasn't just about bad heating. He knew something, even if he'd never admit it. The door slammed behind me again, the echo ringing in my skull. Same room, same concrete bench. Same chill that wrapped around me the second I stepped in. But this time, I noticed something new. The walls. At first glance, they looked like any other jail walls, plain cinder block, painted over 100 times with that sickly gray. But when I sat on the bench and leaned back, my shoulder brushed against something rough. I turned to look. Carvings, lines scratched into the paint, cutting through to the concrete beneath. At first, I thought they were tally marks, straight vertical lines grouped in fives, the kind of thing an inmate might do to pass the time. But these weren't shallow. They were deep, gouged into the wall with something sharp, and there were too many of them, not just one set in one spot. They were everywhere, scattered across the walls, near the bench, around the toilet, even high up near the ceiling. Some overlapped each other, some stood alone, but they all looked old, older than the paint, older than the jail itself. I leaned in close, running my fingers over one set. The grooves were deep, jagged at the edges, as if whoever made them hadn't been carving calmly. They'd been desperate. The longer I looked, the more I realized they weren't random. They weren't just marks. They had weight. They had meaning, but not like normal tally marks. Some of them grouped in sevens, not fives. Others stretched longer, almost like scratches from claws instead of hands. And some didn't look like marks at all. One set near the corner curled into a strange shape, almost like a spiral, but broken, uneven. Another stretched across 3 blocks in a row, slanting down like an arrow. My eyes followed it without meaning to, down to the floor where the concrete looked darker. I crouched there, brushing my fingers against it. The floor was cracked, faint lines radiating out from a single spot, like something had pressed against it from below. My stomach tightened. I told myself it was nothing. Just old damage, bad concrete. But when I sat back up, I noticed something that made my throat go dry. The spiral mark in the corner. It lined up with the crack in the floor, like it was pointing right at it. I forced myself to look away. But once you notice something like that, you can't unsee it. Every set of carvings seemed to aim somewhere. Toward the ceiling, toward the floor, toward the corners where the shadows thickened. It didn't feel like inmates had made them. It felt like warnings. By nightfall, the cold was worse. I curled up on the bench, hugging myself, but my skin still prickled like I'd been standing under an air vent. The light buzzed overhead, flickering every few minutes, throwing those jagged marks into sharp relief. That's when I heard it. A scratching sound. Soft at first, almost lost in the hum of the bulb. I sat up, ears straining, holding my breath. Scratch, scratch, scratch. I turned toward the wall behind me. The sound was coming from there. Not faint, not distant, right behind the concrete. Something was carving. My skin crawled. I pressed my ear to the wall, the chill biting at my face, and I swear I felt it vibrate. A steady rhythm, slow and patient, like something dragging metal across stone. Scratch, pause, scratch. I staggered back, my heart hammering, my eyes darting across the walls. The mark seemed deeper now, sharper. I rubbed my eyes, telling myself I was imagining it, that I was just tired. But when I looked again, one of the sets near the toilet, I could have sworn it had more lines than before. I backed into the corner, sliding down until I was sitting on the floor, my knees pulled tight to my chest. My breath came out in quick bursts, fogging in the cold. The scratching went on for hours. Sometimes it stopped. Sometimes it picked up again from another wall. Sometimes it sounded closer, like it was coming from inside the room itself. And all the while, those carvings seemed to watch me. I thought about the men who'd been in this tank before me. How many of them had run their fingers over these same marks? How many had added their own? How many had sat in this same corner, shivering, listening to something scratch at the walls? By morning, the sound finally stopped. The deputy opened the door, his face as blank as always, but his eyes flicked toward the carvings. Just for a second, like he knew. When he looked back at me, his mouth twitched, like he wanted to say something. But he didn't. He just motioned me out, his hand trembling slightly. As I stepped past him, I glanced back one last time, and I swear on everything, I saw a fresh mark, right where I'd been sitting, still wet. I never thought silence could weigh so much. In the holding tank, it wasn't just quiet, it was heavy, like a blanket pressed over your mouth and nose. The air felt dead, like it hadn't moved in years. and every sound carried too far. A cough, a shuffle, the scrape of chains. They all stretched out into the cold concrete until it seemed like the whole room was breathing with you. But that night, it wasn't the silence that got to me. It was the voice. The drain sat in the center of the holding tank. Just a round metal grate sunk into the concrete, rust crawling across the edges like veins. During the day, you barely noticed it. Just another piece of the floor, something your eyes skimmed over. But at night, when the guards killed the lights and left us to shiver, the drain became something else, something alive. I was half asleep, curled up on the bench with my arms tucked under me, trying to keep the cold from eating my bones. My breath came out in little clouds, pale against the dark. My ears rang with the stillness, the way they sometimes do when a room is too quiet. That's when I heard it. A whisper. At first, I thought it was someone next to me. A drunk, maybe, murmuring in his sleep. But the sound didn't come from the benches. It came from the floor. From the drain. I froze. My skin prickled. The whisper was soft, almost gentle, like a mother leaning close to hush a child. I couldn't make out the words. Just the tone, urgent, secretive. It rose up from the grate, crawling across the concrete until it reached me. I held my breath and listened. Then I heard it clearer. A name. Not mine, not anyone I knew. But it was a name, no doubt about it. Spoken like the syllables had weight, like they mattered more than anything else in the world. And then another, a different name. Then another. One after another, like a roll call from someplace beneath us. I sat up, my hands shaking. My mouth had gone dry. There were 6 of us in the tank that night. None of us spoke. None of us moved. But I knew they heard it too, the way their shoulders stiffened, the way their eyes flicked toward the center of the room, then away. Like kids pretending not to notice a shadow in the corner, I whispered, "You hear that?" No one answered. The drain went quiet for a moment. Just a hum of silence pressing into my ears. And then it started again. Another name, slow, deliberate, spoken like whoever was down there was savoring it. I swallowed hard. "Who are they?" I asked. The guy across from me, an older man with red eyes and a busted lip, shifted on the bench. His voice was low, hoarse. "Don't ask," that was all he said. Don't ask. Like the words themselves might bring something worse crawling up through the floor. But how could I not? The whisper had hooked itself into me. My brain started running in circles. Were they guards messing with us? Some sick joke, piping sound through the vents to keep us awake? Or maybe other inmates on the floor below, their voices drifting up through the pipes. But deep down, I already knew that wasn't it. The drain didn't just carry sound. It pulled it. The names didn't echo like they should have. They rose, straight and clean, like water bubbling up from a spring. I tried to shake it off. I curled up again, pressed my palms over my ears. But the whisper cut through anyway. Softer now, almost coaxing, like it wanted me to lean closer, to give it my full attention. And I did. God help me. I leaned down. The concrete was ice under my palms as I lowered myself toward the grate. My breath fogged over the rust. The whisper sharpened, filling my skull. A name hissed into my ear, so close it felt like someone was crouched right beneath me, lips brushing the metal. I didn't recognize it. Another stranger. Another life I'd never touched. But when the name slid into me, something shifted. For a second, I swore I saw the face. Just a flicker in my head, as quick as a blink. A woman with hollow eyes. Her mouth moving. A scream I couldn't hear. I jerked back so fast I almost cracked my head on the bench. My chest heaved. My pulse thundered in my ears. Across the cell, the older man was watching me. He shook his head once, slow. His lips moved around the same words again. Don't ask. I lay back down, but there was no sleep after that. The drain whispered all night. Names I didn't know. Faces that burned quick and sharp in the back of my mind, like matches struck and snuffed in the same breath. By morning, the whispers stopped. The guards came by, did their routine, never noticing a thing. None of us said a word about it. We sat in silence, eyes fixed anywhere but the floor. But that wasn't the end. The next night, it came again. And this time, it wasn't strangers. The first few names I didn't know. But then it said one I did. A man I'd seen processed just hours earlier, dragged in by two cops after a fight outside a bar. He hadn't even made it past booking. His name rose from the drain, spoken soft and sure, like it was already decided. I didn't want to believe it. But the next morning, he was gone. The guard said nothing. Just empty space on the bench where he'd been. The second night, another. Same thing. A guy I'd seen breathing, moving, cursing under his breath. And then the drain spoke his name, like it had been waiting for him. The morning after gone, I stopped sleeping. Every time I closed my eyes, I heard the whisper pulling me back to the grate. The names burned in my brain. I started repeating them under my breath, like maybe if I remembered them, they wouldn't vanish. But that didn't help. It only made me feel like I was part of the roll call, like the voice was teaching me, preparing me. By the fourth night, I was trembling before the lights even went out. My skin itched with dread. I couldn't stop staring at the drain, waiting for it to come alive. And when it did, when the first name curled up out of that dark hole, it said mine. My whole body went cold. It wasn't a mistake. It wasn't close. It said my name, clear and quiet, like it had been saving it, like it had been waiting for me all along. I couldn't breathe. My tongue felt glued to the roof of my mouth. The whisper stretched it out again, slower this time, savoring it. My name, pulled through teeth I couldn't see, lips I couldn't imagine, and with it came the image. Not a stranger, not some hollow-eyed ghost. It was me. My own face staring back, pale and empty, with lips moving in the dark. The others must have heard it. I felt their eyes on me, heavy, avoiding at the same time. Like they didn't want to admit what they'd just heard. Like maybe if they ignored it, it wouldn't be real. But I knew better. The drain had called me. And in that moment, I realized something I'd been trying not to think about since the first night. The names weren't just random. They weren't just echoes. They were a list. A list of people who wouldn't be leaving this place, and now I was on it. I don't know what's worse, that it said my name, or that I can't stop myself from listening. Even now, with my heart breaking my ribs, I want to lean closer. To hear it say me again, to hear what comes after, because when the voice speaks your name, it feels like it belongs to you, and you belong to it. I thought the cold couldn't get worse. That first night in the holding tank, I felt like I'd been stripped bare and dropped in a freezer. The concrete sucked the warmth out of me, and no matter how I curled up, the shivering never stopped. I told myself I'd get used to it, that after a few nights my body would numb and I wouldn't care. But I was wrong. Each night, the air grew sharper, meaner. It slid down my throat when I breathed, stinging like glass shards. The walls sweated frost, a pale sheen that caught the faint light from the hallway. Even the steel bars were rimmed in white, like someone had painted them with ice. We stopped talking. Our words froze between us, heavy and useless. All we did was breathe, each breath rising into the dark like tiny ghosts. I could see mine, thin and fragile, fading into nothing as soon as it left my lips. But his didn't. There was this one guy in the tank with us. I didn't even know his real name. Everyone just called him Slim because of his frame, long and narrow, like he'd been stretched too far. His face was hollow, his skin pulled tight, and his eyes never seemed to blink enough. The night the temperature dropped hardest, I noticed it. We were huddled on the benches, shaking, our breaths rising and fading. But Slim's breath, it hung there, thick and solid, a pale fog that didn't dissolve. It stayed in front of his face, pulsing with each exhale, stacking on itself until the air around him looked different, denser, almost frozen in place. At first, I thought it was just the light playing tricks, but after a while I realized it wasn't. His breath lingered, thicker than smoke, curling and twisting like it had weight. And the longer I stared, the colder I felt, like just looking at him was pulling the heat out of me. He noticed me watching. His lips barely moved, teeth clicking from the shivers, but his eyes, sunken and rimmed in frost, locked on mine. "Can't. Get warm," he whispered. His voice was hoarse, brittle, like ice cracking underfoot. I wanted to look away, but I couldn't. I wanted to tell him I felt the same, that none of us could get warm, but I knew it wasn't the same. Something was happening to him that wasn't happening to us. He wasn't just cold, he was becoming it. The frost spread from the walls to the floor, curling around the drain, reaching toward the benches. My boots stuck when I shifted, like the concrete was trying to hold me. I rubbed my hands together, but they barely made heat anymore. My fingers were stiff, pale, almost translucent, and slim. He leaned forward, elbows on his knees, shivering so hard his bones rattled. His breath poured out of him in heavy clouds, thicker, denser, filling the air. It didn't rise or fade. It just gathered around him, a halo of frost. One of the other inmates muttered, "Jesus Christ," but his voice cracked off when Slim's head snapped toward him. The fog moved with him like it was attached, clinging to his face. And for a second, I swore his lips weren't just exhaling. They were pulling the air too, dragging in more than they gave. I pressed my back to the wall, trying to disappear into the cold concrete. My heartbeat was the only warmth left in me, thudding slow and heavy, like it was struggling too. The guards didn't come that night. Or maybe they did, and never looked in. The little window in the door stayed black, no footsteps in the hall. Just us, locked in the dark, with Slim sitting in his own storm. His teeth chattered so hard I thought they'd break. But he kept whispering like he couldn't stop himself. Colder, colder, colder. The words sank into me. Every time he said them, the air dropped. My breath came out thinner, fading faster, while his stayed thick, heavy, alive. Hours dragged on. I couldn't sleep. None of us could. We just sat there watching our breath fade while his grew stronger, hanging like a fog bank in the middle of the cell. By morning, I couldn't feel my toes. My skin burned from the freeze, then went numb. When the guards finally came, they didn't notice anything wrong. They opened the slot, slid in trays, shut it again. Not even a glance, and Slim just sat there. His breath, thick and solid, floating around his head like a crown. That was the night I realized something. The cold in that place wasn't natural. It wasn't broken heaters or bad ventilation. It was him, or maybe he was just the first one it claimed. Because when you're locked in a box of concrete and steel, with no heat and no light, the cold starts to want something. And maybe, eventually, it finds someone willing to carry it. Someone who lets it settle in their lungs, their skin, their bones, and then it spreads. That night, the frost crept across the bench beneath me. My breath hung a little longer before fading. My skin ached deeper. I shut my eyes, but I couldn't shut out the thought. What happens when my breath doesn't fade? What happens when it lingers thick and heavy until the cold finally has me too? The morning they told me I was free, I didn't believe it. I'd lost all sense of time in that place. Days and nights melted together in the dim buzz of the lights, in the endless drip of pipes, in the sting of the cold that never lifted. My body felt carved out of stone, stiff and hollow, and my head had long stopped tracking the calendar scratched into the walls. But then a guard came to the tank, keys jangling at his hip. His breath didn't hang in the air like ours. He looked fresh, flushed, warm. The sound of those keys cut sharp through the silence, and when he stopped at my bars, I thought he was there to pull someone else. "Pack up. You're being released," he said. The words didn't land. Released? That word had no weight anymore. I just blinked at him, numb. "You heard me. Intakes cleared you. Let's go." My legs didn't want to move, but I forced them. The concrete had grown familiar under me, the frost in the cracks like veins in my skin. As I stood, I felt eyes on me. The other men pressed against the walls, huddled in their rags of warmth. None of them spoke, but they stared like they knew I was leaving something behind. And then there was Slim. He sat on the far bench, hunched and still. His breath hung thick, a pale fog that never moved. It clung to him like a second skin. His eyes followed me, cold and unblinking, as I stepped toward the open bars. For a moment, I thought about stopping. About telling the guard what I'd seen, what I'd felt, the way the cold was alive in that tank, the way Slim was becoming part of it. But the words stuck in my throat, because even if I told him, he wouldn't hear it. Not the way I did. The door clanged shut behind me, sealing the others in. I didn't look back again. The walk through the jail felt unreal. My boots scraped the concrete floor, but I felt like I was floating. The hallways were warmer out here, though not by much. And I could feel the change like stepping out of a freezer into a weak spring breeze. Guards moved past me, their uniforms crisp, their cheeks flushed from heat I couldn't feel. None of them looked twice at me. I was just another body being moved. At intake, they handed me my belongings: wallet, belt, shoestrings, all the little pieces of myself that had been stripped away. They told me to sign papers, my hand shaking so badly I could barely form the letters. "You all right?" the clerk asked without looking up. I nodded, but I wasn't, because while I stood there, I felt it, under my sleeves, under my skin. An ache, deep and sharp, that had nothing to do with cold air anymore. It was something that had stayed with me. When they opened the final door, I stepped into sunlight. It should have been warm. It was warm. I could see the shimmer of heat on the asphalt, hear the buzz of cicadas in the distance. Summer air wrapped around me, thick and alive, but I didn't feel it. My body stayed cold. My skin prickled, stiff, like I was still sitting in that tank. I lifted my hand to shield my eyes from the sun, and that's when I saw it. My fingers were white, not just pale, but bone white, with faint shades of blue in the joints. The skin looked raw, dry, like it had been gnawed on by frost. I yanked up my sleeve. My forearm was the same, blotched patches of frostbite scars, pale and cracked, spreading like veins. The air was 90 degrees, and my skin looked like it had been pulled from a snowbank. I pressed my hand against my chest. I didn't feel warmth there either. My heartbeat thudded sluggish, as though it too was weighed down by ice. For the first time in months, I wanted to cry. Not from fear of jail, not from shame of being caught, but from the realization that I hadn't left that cell at all. Part of it had come with me. I didn't tell anyone. When I got back to my apartment, my neighbor said I looked sick, asked if I needed a doctor. I shook my head. What doctor could explain scars that looked like frostbite in the middle of summer? At night, I tried to sleep, but I couldn't shake the memory. The carvings in the wall, the whisper from the drain, Slim's breath, thick and frozen, never fading. I'd shut my eyes, but I'd feel it. Air against my neck, cold and wet like someone leaning over me, breathing into my skin. Sometimes I'd wake and see my own breath in the dark, hanging just a second too long before fading. And other times, it wouldn't fade at all. Weeks passed. The scars stayed. I wore long sleeves even in the heat, pretending. But inside, I knew the truth. The jail hadn't let me go. It had marked me. The cold that lived in that holding tank had sunk its claws into my skin, and now it followed me, step by step. Every time I breathed, every time I felt the air turn sharp in my throat, I wondered if I was carrying it the way Slim had. If maybe, one day, my breath would stop fading completely. And when that happened, I'd just be another body the cold could keep. Another ghost sitting on a frozen bench, whispering into the drain, waiting for someone new to join me. When I first got the position, it felt like I'd won something. They called it trusty duty, a fancy way of saying I'd behaved well enough for long enough that they could give me small freedoms. In a place like county jail, that was gold. It meant I got to mop the halls, wipe down tables, take out trash. It meant fewer hours locked in a cell, and sometimes, if the guards were in a good mood, I got scraps of extra food. But the real privilege wasn't the food or the lighter shifts. It was the keys. Not the full ring like the guards had, but a little jangling set of half a dozen that opened supply closets, laundry, the kitchen, and the inner doors of the block. Enough to make me feel less like cattle and more like a man again. I wore them on my hip, and every time they clinked when I walked, I felt the eyes of the other inmates on me. Some were jealous. Others just stared like they knew it wasn't a gift. It was a curse waiting to happen, because being a trustee didn't just mean cleaning floors during the day. It meant moving through the jail at night. When the lights dimmed and the noise of the block died down, that's when I felt the weight of those keys the most. The first night I walked the corridor after dark, mop bucket in hand, I thought the silence would feel like freedom. I thought it would feel good to stand outside the cells while everyone else was locked away, to breathe air that wasn't heavy with 30 men's sweat. But it didn't. The silence was too complete. Every step echoed. The building itself seemed to breathe. Old pipes creaked. The steel doors ticked with temperature shifts, and somewhere deep in the walls, water dripped. The block that had felt cramped and loud during the day suddenly seemed endless at night. Its shadows stretching too far, its corners deeper than I remembered. The guards stayed in their office. They didn't patrol much after midnight. That was my job. Mopping, taking trash out, making sure nothing spilled or clogged. I told myself it was fine. I told myself I liked it. But by the second week, I wasn't so sure. I'll never forget the first time I noticed it. I was mopping near the showers. The tiles were slick. The kind of slick that makes the mop just slide instead of scrub. I leaned into it, humming under my breath to cut the silence. Then I heard it. A door opening. Soft, slow. I froze. My keys clinked when I shifted, too loud in the dead hall. But when I looked down the corridor, every door was shut. Steel locked tight, just like they should have been. I told myself it was nothing. An echo. Pipes. A dream in the middle of waking hours. But then, as I dragged the mop again, I swore I saw movement, a shadow, long and thin, stretched across the far wall where no one should have been standing. I blinked, and it was gone. When I told one of the guards the next morning, he smirked. That's why we don't like walking the halls after lights out. You start hearing things. He didn't mean it as a joke. He said it flat, like it was a truth everyone in uniform already knew, and it stuck with me. By the third week, I started dreading the night shifts. The halls felt different when the cells were quiet, like something lived in the gaps. When I pushed the mop bucket past the holding tank, I swear the air grew colder. The smell of bleach mixed with something else. Wet stone, mildew, almost like a basement no one had opened in years. Sometimes I heard voices. Not loud, not clear, just the sound of someone speaking low through a wall. When I stopped to listen, it faded, leaving me with only the sound of my breath. I told myself I was imagining it. Jail does that, messes with your head. But one night I found proof it wasn't just in my head. It was late, past 2. I'd been asked to take trash from the kitchen down to the bins near intake. The bags were heavy, leaking grease and food scraps. I hauled them down the back corridor, where the lights buzzed weak and the paint peeled from the walls. That's when I saw it. The supply closet door was open. It shouldn't have been. I'd locked it myself earlier. I knew because I'd fumbled the keys, dropping them once before finally getting the right one in. But there it was, wide enough for a man to slip inside. I froze in the hall, trash bags at my feet, the smell of old food rising around me. My skin prickled, every hair on my neck standing up. I stepped closer, slow. The closet was dark, shadows stacked on shadows. "Hello?" I whispered. My voice echoed down the hall, but no one answered. I reached for the keys at my hip, but they were shaking in my hand. When I swung the door shut, the hinges groaned, loud as a scream. I jammed the key in, turned it fast, and stepped back. My heart hammered so loud I thought the guards would hear it from their office. But they didn't. No one came. And in the silence that followed, I swear I heard something on the other side of that door. A breath. Long, low, drawn right against the wood. I never told the guards about that one. I didn't see the point, because by then I realized something. Being a trustee wasn't a privilege. It wasn't a reward. It was a way of making sure the halls were never empty. Someone had to walk them. Someone had to keep moving, keys jingling, footsteps echoing, making the jail believe it was still alive. And maybe the guards knew that. Maybe that's why they stayed in their office after lights out, pretending not to hear the doors shift or the whispers in the walls. They had us for that. The trustees. The ones stupid enough to think freedom of movement meant freedom at all. But it didn't. All it meant was that we were the ones who saw it first. The shadows. The doors opening without keys. The breath waiting in the dark. And once you've seen it, you can't go back. The keys don't feel like privilege anymore. They feel like bait. When you spend enough nights alone in a jail, you start to notice things the others can't. Little details, cracks in the routine. The guards sit in their office with the TV on, half asleep, and the inmates snore in their bunks or whisper in the dark. But me, I had keys. I had places to go. And when you're given the run of the halls, you start pulling at loose threads. That's how I found it. It wasn't supposed to be there. I'd been mopping the corridor past the laundry, the one that dead-ended at the old fire door, a place nobody bothered with, because the door was sealed, and the wall had been repainted over the exit sign years ago. But when my mop sloshed water along the edge of the baseboard, I noticed something strange. The draft, cold air, sliding through a crack in the frame of the wall like the whole place was breathing. I leaned down, pressing my cheek close. The concrete was rough and the air was real, icy, steady. Not a trick. That's when I saw the hinges. They'd painted them over, but they were still there, faint under the beige layer. A door disguised as a wall. My chest tightened. My first thought was simple. I shouldn't know this. I shouldn't be seeing it, but the keys on my hip jingled like they already knew the answer. I stood up, glanced over my shoulder. No guard in sight. No cameras pointing this way. I slid the smallest key into the crack at the base of the painted door. It didn't fit, of course. Not there. But I ran the teeth along the seam, feeling for something, anything. And then I found it. The panel wasn't sealed. A latch hidden under the paint gave way when I pressed hard enough. The whole slab groaned, paint cracking like old skin, and the disguised door swung inward. What I saw beyond it, I'll never forget. The air hit me first, stale, cold, but not like the halls. A deeper kind of cold, like a basement where time itself had been left to rot. I stepped through. It was a dorm. Rows of bunks lined up, each with a thin mattress, a folded blanket at the foot, and a pillow propped neatly at the head. Every single one was made, corners tucked sharp, like an inspection was coming. But the beds had never been slept in. The blankets were stiff with factory folds. The pillows had no dents, no creases, no stains. It was like the whole room had been dressed up to look alive, but had never actually lived, and it wasn't small either. It stretched long, maybe 30 beds across, with barred windows high up on the wall, black with dust. The strangest part was the smell. Not rot, not mildew, just emptiness. A scent so clean and hollow that it made my stomach twist. I stepped further in, my shoes squeaking against the floor. The sound bounced back at me like the dorm was too big for its own walls. I half expected someone to shout. A guard catching me. Another inmate sneaking through. But nothing. Only silence. And in that silence, the thought pressed in. Why build a dorm and never use it? Who was it waiting for? I walked between the rows. My hand brushed the blanket on one of the beds, and dust puffed up, hanging in the air like smoke. The beds weren't numbered like ours. No painted stencils. No names scratched into the frames. It was blank, like it had been prepared for ghosts. I stopped at the far wall. A clipboard hung there, yellow with age. The paper on it had curled at the edges. Words faded to almost nothing, but I could still make out the top line. Dormitory C, capacity 60. There were only 30 beds. Where were the rest? I turned, staring back at the empty room. The twin rows lined up neat and waiting. My breath came out white, like the air in there was colder than it should have been. And then I realized something worse. It didn't feel abandoned. It felt paused, like someone had set it all up, then stopped time before the men arrived. Like any second, they might come walking in. I left the dorm in a hurry, slamming the hidden door shut behind me. My keys shook as I locked it. The paint cracked around the edges now, a faint scar where the seam had been. If anyone looked too close, they might notice, but no one did. The guards didn't say a word. The inmates didn't know. Only me. And that night, lying on my own bunk, I couldn't sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw those made beds waiting in the dark. I imagined footsteps filling the dorm, bodies sliding under those blankets, heads sinking into those perfect pillows. But in my mind, they weren't men. They weren't alive. They were shadows. Things that belonged to the jail itself, rising up from the floor, taking their places like they'd been promised beds long ago. And the thought that kept me awake wasn't just that the room existed, it was that someone had built it for them. I tried to stay away after that. But the thing about secrets is, once you know one, it starts pulling you back. Every time I passed the laundry corridor, I felt the draft on my skin. Every time my keys jingled, I thought about trying the lock again, and one night, I gave in. The hall was empty. The guards were in their office. I slid the latch, opened the door, and stepped inside again. The air was the same, cold, hollow, waiting, but something was different this time. The beds. One of the blankets was folded wrong. Not much, just a corner untucked, the edge of the mattress showing, but I knew I hadn't touched it the first time. I stood there staring at it, my throat dry. My hands felt numb, the keys cold against my hip. Slowly, I reached for the blanket, pulled it back. The mattress underneath had an indent, like someone had lain there. Not deep, not fresh, but real. I dropped the blanket and stumbled back, heart hammering. The room seemed darker now, the shadows thicker around the bunks. I swore I heard the faint sound of breathing, steady and slow, coming from somewhere in the rows. I didn't check. I didn't dare. I turned and ran, slamming the door, locking it twice over, and this time, I didn't tell a soul. But the thing is, secrets don't stay hidden, not forever. The next night, during count, I felt something shift. The dorm wasn't empty anymore. I couldn't see it, but I felt it heavy in my chest, pressing against me. The jail was holding more men than it should have, men who weren't on the books, men who didn't show up in count. And the worst part? I don't think the guards cared. I think they'd built that dorm for them, and now it wasn't waiting anymore. It was filling. You ever try convincing yourself you didn't see something? You tell yourself it was the light, or your mind playing tricks, or that you're just too damn tired. That's what I tried to do after finding that dorm, but it doesn't work. Not when the jail has its hooks in you. Every night after that, I'd lie on my bunk staring at the ceiling, trying not to think about the folded blankets and the one bed that wasn't folded right. I tried not to think about that dent in the mattress, but you can't unsee something like that. You can only wait for it to come back, and it did. The first time I heard it, I thought it was the guys down the hall, murmurs, low voices, the kind you hear when two men whisper in the dark, trading secrets across the tiers, except it wasn't coming from the hall, it was coming from the laundry corridor, right where that hidden dorm sat waiting. I froze. My skin prickled and I pulled the blanket tighter. I told myself it was the pipes, the vents, anything but what it really was. But then came the second sound, snores, heavy, tired snores, rising and falling in rhythm. Not just one, a whole row of them. It made my stomach flip, because I knew that sound. I'd been locked up long enough to recognize it. That was the sound of a dorm full of men asleep. And the problem was, that dorm was supposed to be empty. The noise went on for hours. I could hear the whispers start up, fade away, replaced by the soft hum of sleep. It wasn't loud. No, it was worse than that. It was faint, like it was seeping through the walls themselves, barely reaching me, but enough that I couldn't block it out. When Count came in the morning, the guard never said a word. He didn't even glance down the laundry corridor. Nobody else seemed to notice, but I knew, and I couldn't stop thinking about the blankets. The perfect folds, the waiting pillows, beds that had never been touched, but now somehow were being used. The next night I sat up on my bunk, waiting. I didn't want to hear it again, but I couldn't stop myself. Sure enough, when the jail went quiet, when the coughs and whispers of real inmates died down, the sound crept back. First the murmurs, low, broken, not words I could make out but steady, like men talking in their sleep. Then the snores, that slow rhythm, one overlapping another, filling the silence with something that shouldn't have been there. It made me sweat. My mouth went dry. I kept telling myself not to listen, but the more I tried to block it out, the sharper it became, like the dorm wanted me to hear. On the third night, I made a mistake. I got up. The guards were out of sight. The block was still. I told myself I just needed to know, just to prove it to myself. I walked down the corridor, keys cold against my hip, and stopped at the painted door. The sound was louder up close. No question about it. Breathing, dozens of lungs pulling air in and pushing it out, steady and deep. I gripped the latch. My hand shook. I could have opened it. I had the chance. But I didn't. Because in that moment, I realized something that made my stomach knot. If I opened that door and the room was full of men, I'd have to see who they were, and if the room was empty, I'd still hear them. Either way, I'd lose what little grip I had left. So I stepped back. I let go. I walked away, but the sound followed me all the way back to my bunk. And when I finally fell asleep, I dreamed of that room. Only it wasn't empty anymore. The bunks were full, every bed taken. And all those men, they turned their heads toward me at once, their faces blank, their mouths open, murmuring my name. After that, I stopped going near the laundry corridor. I tried to ignore it. I told myself, just keep your head down, do your work, stay out of it. But the problem was, the noises weren't staying in the dorm anymore. They started leaking out. I'd be sweeping the halls, and I'd hear the faint rasp of a snore behind me, even though no one was there. I'd be mopping near the offices, and I'd catch a whisper drift past my ear, though the guards were too far away to hear. It was like the dorm was spreading. And the longer it went on, the more I felt it wasn't just noise. It was presence, like something was filling the jail that wasn't supposed to be there. And at night, when I lay in my bunk, I couldn't help asking myself the same question over and over. If those beds were empty when I first found them, then who the hell was sleeping there now? One night I woke up gasping. My skin was ice. My chest felt heavy, like someone was sitting on me. At first I thought it was sleep paralysis. I'd had it before. But this was different. I could move my hands, my feet. I could breathe, though it felt thick and ragged. The sound that woke me wasn't my own voice. It was the snore. Not distant this time, right next to me, like someone was lying in the bunk beside mine, even though I knew it was empty. I turned my head slowly, too afraid to do it fast. And in the dark, I swore I saw the blanket rise and fall as though a chest was underneath. Breathing, I shut my eyes and prayed it wasn't real. When I opened them again, the bunk was flat, but the sound hadn't stopped. It was still there, crawling under my skin, echoing from nowhere and everywhere all at once. That's when I knew the truth. The dorm wasn't just a room, it was bleeding into the rest of the jail and whatever was filling those bunks at night. It wasn't staying there, it was spreading. After that, I couldn't sleep. Not properly. I'd sit up half the night listening, waiting. And I kept asking myself one question, the kind of question that eats at you, slow and steady, until you can't think of anything else. Not what was in that dorm, not even why it was there. But who? Who were they? Who was snoring, murmuring, filling up those bunks? And worse, if I ever found out, would I still be me after I knew the answer? Because deep down, I had the sinking feeling those weren't new. Inmates, no, they were old ones, men. The jail had swallowed whole. Men no one remembered anymore. And the jail had given them back their beds. I never thought a tree could scare me. It sounds ridiculous, doesn't it? A tree. Just wood and bark, roots in the ground. But if you'd been where I was, if you'd seen what I saw every day through the bars, you'd understand why that oak was different. We called it the hanging tree. Everyone did. It stood right in the middle of the jail's courtyard, tall and wide, older than anything else around. Its branches stretched out heavy and low, the kind you could almost touch if you climbed onto the bench near the fence. The bark was split and scarred, deep cracks running like veins all the way up, and hanging from the thickest branch was a groove. Not a rope, not anymore. Just a deep scar in the wood, worn in a perfect circle. That's what made it worse. The rope was gone, but the mark was still there. When I first came in, I thought it was just a story the older guys told. A way to mess with new fish. They said back in the old days, before the county even had a proper execution chamber, the sheriff handled things himself. He'd march men out into the courtyard, tie the rope, and let them swing under that branch until they stopped kicking. And when the body was cut down, the tree kept the memory. That's what they said. At night, when the lights dimmed and the guards pulled back, guys swore they could hear the creak of rope swaying. a sound that didn't belong in a quiet yard. Some claimed they saw shadows moving against the walls, swinging back and forth even when no one was out there. I laughed at it at first, told myself it was just another ghost story. But the more I stared at that tree, the less I could laugh. There was something about it. Something that didn't feel like it belonged. I remember my first week inside when they let us into the yard for recreation. It was a cold morning, and the sky was gray, the kind that presses down on you. We walked out into the courtyard, and everyone gave the tree a wide berth. It was strange. Men who would fight each other bloody, men who didn't flinch at shanks or threats, suddenly crossing to the far side of the yard like the tree might reach out and grab them. I stood near the fence, pretending I didn't notice, but I couldn't help staring. The bark looked darker than it should, black in places, like stains. And when the wind blew, the branches groaned in a way that made my skin crawl. Not the normal sound of wood shifting. No, this was different, slower, heavier, like weight, like something still hanging there. That night, one of the older inmates, a guy named Curtis, leaned over from the bunk above mine and whispered, "Don't look at it too long." I asked him what he meant. He said, "The tree. You give it too much attention, it'll start looking back." I laughed, though my voice came out thinner than I meant it to. "It's just a tree." Curtis didn't laugh. "That's what they want you to think." I didn't know if he meant the guards or the men who told the stories or the tree itself. He never explained. He just rolled over and pulled his blanket tight. But I couldn't stop thinking about his words. The tree looking back. Weeks went by, and I kept catching myself staring. During count, during chow, during rec. Even when I wasn't in the courtyard, I could see it through the narrow windows of the block. It seemed taller some days, like it was stretching upward, pressing against the sky. And sometimes, just as I was drifting off to sleep, I'd hear it, a soft creak. Back and forth, like rope under tension. The sound was so faint I thought maybe it was the building settling. But then I'd hear something else, tucked low in the noise, a breath, slow, uneven, like someone whose neck was broken but lungs hadn't gotten the message. One afternoon, they brought us out to the yard again. The sun was bright that day, and the light cut across the bark in sharp lines. I noticed something I hadn't before. Carvings, names. They ran all up and down the trunk, etched into the wood in sloppy, jagged letters. Most were too worn to read, faded by time and weather, but a few stood out clear. First names, last names, some just initials. I asked one of the guys beside me about it, but he just shook his head. "Don't ask. Don't touch. You don't want your name there." That stuck with me, because I didn't know who carved them. The inmates? The guards? Or something else? That night, Curtis told me the story straight. He said the tree had been drinking blood for a long time, long before it ever stood in the jail yard. Back when the town was young, they used it for hangings. Rustlers, killers, men caught stealing horses. They dragged them to that tree. The sheriff just kept the tradition alive, and the tree learned to hold on. Curtis swore every man who ever swung from it had their name cut into the bark by morning, whether anyone touched a knife to it or not. I told him that was impossible. That wood didn't just carve itself. He just stared at me, eyes sunken and tired, and said, "Watch. You'll see." For a while, I avoided the courtyard. I volunteered for kitchen duty, cleaning, anything that kept me busy inside. But you can't stay hidden forever. One night during lockdown, I woke up to shouting. A new guy on the tier, some young kid, had gone out into the courtyard on a bet. Said he didn't believe the stories. Said he'd prove it. He climbed the fence around the tree. The guards pulled him down before he did anything stupid. But word spread quick. The next morning, when they dragged us out for count, we all looked at the tree, and sure enough, right there on the trunk, a new name was scratched into the bark. The kid's. He swore up and down he hadn't touched it. Said he never even had a chance. But the name was there, deep and fresh, like the tree had been waiting for him. After that, I couldn't stop staring. The branches, the groove where the rope once was, the names crawling up and down the trunk like veins, and the thought kept circling in my head, over and over. Louder each night, I lay awake listening to that phantom creak. The tree wasn't just a story, it was history. It was memory. And one day, it might decide to remember me. I'll never forget the day I saw it happen. The hanging tree already had a grip on us. By then, nobody wanted to stand too close to it. Even the tough guys, the ones who'd stab you over a wrong look, wouldn't lean against its trunk. They'd pace the yard, smoke, sit on the far benches, but never touch the tree, except one man. His name was Ortega. Big guy, built like stone. He'd done time before and thought all the stories were just ways to keep weak men in line. He'd laugh every time someone mentioned the tree, said it was just wood and shadow. One afternoon during rec, Ortega sat down at the base of it. I saw it happen. The sun was hot. The yard smelled like sweat and concrete, and Ortega just dropped down with his back pressed against the bark, arms folded like he was daring the rest of us to stop him. No one did. We just watched. He sat there for maybe 20 minutes, looking smug like he was proving a point. Some of the other inmates whispered, shaking their heads. Curtis, the old-timer who told me not to look at the tree too long, wouldn't even glance in Ortega's direction. He just muttered under his breath, "Fool!" When the guards called time, Ortega stood up slow, like he was sore. He stretched, cracked his neck, and grinned at everyone. "See?" he said. "Nothing." But it wasn't nothing. I noticed it first. As he walked past, I saw the skin on the back of his neck. Red, raw, like a burn. I didn't say anything at first. I figured maybe it was just the heat. Maybe the bark scraped him when he leaned back. But later that night, when he pulled his shirt off in the block, everyone saw it wasn't a scrape. It was a mark, a ring around his neck, dark, bruised and broken in patches like the skin had been pulled by rope. The room went quiet. No one laughed. No one made a joke. Ortega frowned, rubbing the back of his neck. "It's nothing, just the bark. Sharp edges, that's all. But we knew. Every man in that cell block knew what it looked like. Rope burn. Not fresh rope either. Not clean. The mark was jagged, uneven. Like old hemp, frayed and rough, the kind they used for hangings. That night, Ortega couldn't sleep. I was on the bunk across from him, and I heard him tossing, muttering. Every time his head hit the pillow, he'd sit back up, rubbing his throat. At one point, he caught me watching and snapped, "What the hell are you looking at?" I didn't answer, because the truth was, I wasn't looking at him. Not really. I was looking at the shadow on the wall behind him. His body blocked part of the light, but around his neck. I swear I saw a dark line, thin and sharp, circling like a noose, and it was swaying, back and forth, even though he wasn't moving. By morning, his voice was hoarse. When he spoke at chow, it came out cracked, strained, like every word was a struggle. His throat had bruised darker overnight, spreading like ink under the skin. He kept saying he was fine. Kept saying it was just an infection or a rash. But the way his eyes darted, I could tell he didn't believe it. On the third day, he stopped coming out to the yard. The guards had to drag him, cursing and thrashing, but when they finally got him outside, he didn't go near the tree. He stuck to the fence, clutching the chain links with white knuckles, staring at the oak like it was alive. I walked past him once, close enough to hear his whisper. He was begging under his breath. "Not me. Not me. I didn't do anything. Not me." I wanted to ask who he was talking to, but the words died in my throat because I already knew the answer. That night, something woke me. It wasn't a shout or a fight. It wasn't the usual clanging of bars or guards stomping down the tier. It was softer, a creak, slow, heavy. The same sound I'd heard in my head too many nights before. I sat up, heart hammering, and looked across the block. Ortega was in his bunk, thrashing like he was caught in a nightmare. His legs kicked, his hands clawed at his throat. His face was turning red, then purple. The men around him shouted, trying to shake him awake, but his eyes were wide open, and on his neck, God help me, I saw it tighten. An invisible line digging deep, pulling harder with every second. His body lifted off the mattress just an inch, maybe less, but it was enough. Enough to see he wasn't fighting a dream. He was fighting a rope none of us could see. The guards rushed in. They pulled him down, tried to shake him back to life. But by then, The mark on his throat had turned black, and Ortega wasn't moving. They hauled him out, his head hanging to the side, the burn around his neck clear as day. No one said it out loud, but we all thought the same thing. The tree had taken him. Afterward, the yard felt different. The hanging tree didn't just look like part of the jail anymore. It looked hungry. Its branches seemed to sag lower, stretching closer to the ground, and every time I walked past, I swore I could hear it groaning, not in the wind, not in the weather, groaning like wood under strain, like weight, like rope. From that day on, no one leaned against it again. But it didn't matter. The tree didn't need us to touch it. It just needed us to look too long, to think about it too much, to let it inside our heads. And once it was there, it decided when to pull the rope tight. They said Ortega was the last fool who thought the tree was just bark and roots. After he was taken, the yard changed. Nobody lingered out there anymore, not even during the day. You'd see men jogging circles, doing push-ups, anything to avoid stopping too close. But night was worse, because at night, the tree wasn't quiet. The first time I heard it, I thought it was my imagination. It was near midnight, the block finally still. I was lying on my bunk, staring at the ceiling, when something drifted through the bars. A sound, soft, slow, like creaking wood. At first I thought it was the building settling, or maybe the old pipes. But then I realized it wasn't coming from inside. It was coming from the yard, the direction of the courtyard, the direction of the tree. I tried to ignore it, rolled over, pulled the blanket over my ears. But the sound grew louder, sharper, like wood under pressure, like something swaying, something heavy. I held my breath, waiting for it to stop. It didn't, and then I heard something else, a low thud. Then another, feet dangling, hitting the trunk. I forced myself up, even though my chest felt like it was caving in. The small window in our block looked out toward the courtyard. You couldn't see much, just the upper branches of the tree against the night sky. But that was enough, because they were moving. Not all of them, not in the wind, swaying, back and forth, the way a rope sways when there's weight at the end of it. My mouth went dry. I blinked, rubbed my eyes, leaned closer to the glass, but there was nothing there, no bodies, no ropes, just shadows, stretching from the branches like dark stains on the night. And yet, they moved, slow, gentle, like men hanging in silence. I told myself it was tricks of the moonlight. Maybe clouds shifting, maybe my mind playing with me. But then I noticed something that made my stomach knot. There weren't just one or two shadows. There were dozens, all swaying, all hanging a full gathering, like the tree had called them back for one last roll. Call. I stumbled away from the window, heart racing. Across the block, I caught sight of Curtis. The old man was awake, sitting on his bunk with his back to the wall, staring at the same window. He didn't look surprised. He didn't look scared either. He just looked resigned, like he'd seen it all before. When he noticed me watching, he shook his head slow. "Don't look too long," he whispered. His voice was thin, cracked, but it carried across the silence. And I listened. I pulled the blanket over my head and didn't move until morning. The next day, I couldn't stop thinking about it. Were they real, or just my mind filling in the dark? I tried asking Curtis at Chow, "What was that last night?" I muttered. He didn't answer right away. He just picked at his bread, eyes down. Finally, he said, "You saw him, didn't you?" I nodded. He sighed. "They come every few weeks. Always at night. You can hear him before you see him." I swallowed hard. "Who are they?" He looked up then, eyes heavy and hollow. "Everyone who ever swung from that tree." I didn't ask more. I couldn't, but the words stuck in me, heavy as stone. Everyone who ever swung. That meant hundreds, maybe more, all crammed into the branches, hanging unseen except when the night was quiet enough for them to gather. That evening, I swore I wouldn't look again, but when the block went silent, the creaking started, the thudding followed, and then the whispers. Yes, whispers. At first I thought it was the guys in the tier talking low in the dark. But no, the voices were outside, carried through the air, dry, broken voices like old ropes scraping across wood. I couldn't make out the words, just the sound, dozens of voices rising and falling like a mournful prayer. I pulled the blanket over my head again, squeezing my eyes shut, but it didn't help. The voices slid through the cracks of my mind, pulling me toward the window, and the longer I resisted, the louder they grew. Finally, I couldn't take it. I crept up and looked again. The branches were thick with movement. Not one or two shadows this time, but rows, lines of them, men swaying, faces hidden, feet dangling just above the ground. I could almost see their shapes, not just shadows anymore, details. Shoulders, heads bowed, some twitching like they hadn't stopped struggling even in death, and they were all facing the same way, toward the window, toward me. My breath caught in my throat, and in that moment, one shadow broke from the rest. It jerked, twisting against the air, its head lifting slow, and though there was no face, I swear I felt it looking straight at me. The voices hushed all at once. Silence, except for the creak of that one. Rope, that one body, swaying. Closer, closer, until the shadow brushed against the edge of the glass. I fell back, heart slamming in my chest, and crawled under the blanket. I stayed there until dawn, shivering, praying for light. When the morning came, the yard looked empty. The tree was still. The branches were bare, but I knew what I'd seen, and worse, I knew they'd seen me too. I didn't sleep the next night, or the night after. I kept my back to the wall, eyes shut, pretending not to hear the creak and sway, pretending not to notice the whispers pressing against the bars. Because Curtis was right. You can't look too long. Once you do, they notice. And when they notice, they don't forget. I used to think the worst thing in jail was the waiting. Waiting for chow. Waiting for court. Waiting for your name to be called, never knowing if it was good news or bad. But I was wrong. The worst thing is waking up and realizing something has its hands on you. Something that isn't supposed to exist. That night started, like all the others after the gathering. The block was quiet, but not peaceful. It was the kind of silence that comes from men pretending to be asleep, pretending they don't hear the creaking from the courtyard. I lay on my bunk with my eyes shut tight. My body was tense, every muscle stiff as if I was bracing for impact. The sound started around midnight, that slow, steady groan of wood under strain. The tree, the ropes. I tried to focus on my breathing. In through the nose, out through the mouth. Don't listen. Don't look, but then I felt it. A draft across my neck. Cold, sharp, like winter air slipping through a crack that shouldn't be there. And with it came the whispers. Dozens of voices, hushed, rising and falling, pressing in close. Too close. I opened my eyes. The cell was pitch black, darker than it should have been. Usually you could see the faint glow of the security lights bleeding in from the hall. But that night there was nothing. I thought maybe the power was out again, but then I realized it wasn't that the light was gone, it was that something was blocking it. Something tall, something standing at the bars. I froze, my chest tightened, and before I could move I felt pressure around my throat. Not hands, not rope, something in between. Cold, rough, digging into the skin but not solid. I tried to cry out, but no sound came. My feet kicked against the mattress, my fingers clawing at my neck. The pressure tightened, and then I wasn't on the bunk anymore. I was rising, my back scraped against the bars, my toes leaving the mattress. My whole body was lifted, dragged upward by nothing I could see. I thrashed, panic surging through every nerve. My vision blurred. My lungs screamed for air, but the thing, whatever it was, just kept pulling me higher until I was dangling, just like the shadows outside. My body jerked, fighting against the invisible noose. My hands tore at my throat, but they only met empty air. Nothing was there, and yet I was choking, suspended. Helpless. The whispers swelled around me louder now, echoing inside my skull. I couldn't understand the words, but I felt them. Heavy. Condemning. Judging. My head was spinning, stars exploding behind my eyes. I thought this was it. This was how I was going to die, hung in my cell, like some final sick joke from that tree. Then, through the ringing in my ears, I heard something else. Footsteps. Heavy boots pounding down the corridor. A flashlight beam cut across the darkness, sweeping through the bars, and just like that, I dropped. The pressure vanished. My body slammed back onto the mattress, coughing, gasping, throat burning raw. The guard's voice echoed through the block. What the hell's going on in here? But I couldn't answer. All I could do was curl up on the bunk, clutching my throat and wheeze like a dying animal. By the time the lights came on, the thing was gone. The guard checked the tier, shining his light into each cell. Nothing. No one standing at my bars. And when he looked at me, all he saw was another inmate half asleep, rubbing his neck like he'd had a bad dream. He moved on, muttering under his breath. I wanted to scream at him, tell him what just happened, show him the red marks burning across my skin, but I didn't, because deep down I knew he wouldn't believe me, and worse, I wasn't even sure it had really happened. The next morning I touched my neck again. The skin was tender, raw. When I looked in the tiny mirror bolted to the wall, I saw faint lines wrapping across my throat, like rope burns. But they were uneven, too wide for a cord, too narrow for hands, something in between. Curtis noticed me at chow. He didn't ask questions. He didn't need to. He just stared at the marks on my neck and nodded, like it confirmed something he'd already known. "They picked you," he muttered. My stomach sank. Picked me for what? He didn't answer. He just went back to his food. That night, I didn't even try to sleep. I sat on the bunk with my back against the wall, staring at the door, waiting for it to happen again, and it did. Almost exactly the same time. The whispers, the draft, the darkness that felt too heavy, too thick, and then the grip tightening around my throat, lifting me, pulling me up. This time I fought harder. I kicked against the bars, slammed my fists into the air, tried to scream. Nothing helped. I was weightless again, my body dangling, swaying in the dark, and through the corner of my eye, I saw movement at the window, the branches of the tree. And in those branches, shadows, dozens of them, all hanging, all swaying, and every single one of them had their heads turned toward me. My vision dimmed. My body convulsed. I could feel myself slipping, falling into the same silence that had swallowed all of them. But then, I dropped again, hard. I landed on the bunk, coughing, chest heaving, throat blazing with pain. The whispers faded. The cold draft pulled back, and I was left alone in the dark, shaking, drenched in sweat. That was 3 nights ago. It hasn't happened since. But I don't sleep anymore. Not really. I can feel it waiting. The tree, the shadows, the invisible rope that fits too perfectly around my neck. And I know this much. It won't stop, not until I'm swaying with them, not until I'm another shadow in the midnight gathering. I used to work at a jail. Not a big one, not the kind you see in movies with rows and rows of barred cells. Ours was small, just a squat brick building that sat at the edge of town like some forgotten relic. People used to joke that it looked more like a storage warehouse than a place meant to hold men. But when the sun went down and the doors locked, that building felt heavier than anything I've ever known. I took the job when I was 24. Back then I thought it was steady work, good pay for a place like ours. My uncle knew the sheriff and he vouched for me. At first I worked day shifts, easy stuff. You check cells, sign the logbook, hand out trays of food. But over time, the older guys didn't want nights anymore. Said their bodies couldn't take it. That's how I got stuck with them. The overnight shifts, alone, most nights in that place. You'd think nights in a small-town jail would be boring, and for a while they were. The drunks would sleep it off. The petty thieves would pace in their cells until exhaustion wore them down. I had a routine, walk the block every hour, check doors, jot down times in the log, drink bad coffee until the sun came up. But when I think back on my final week, I don't know how I made it through those nights at all. It started simple, just a feeling. The first night of that last week, I remember sitting at the desk with the old fluorescent light buzzing above me. It always buzzed, but that night it sounded worse, like it was struggling to stay alive. I remember staring at the clock. It was past midnight, maybe 12:30. The halls were quiet, but I felt like someone was standing right behind me, not moving, not breathing, just watching. I turned, of course. There was nothing there, just the corridor stretching into the dark. The cells were locked, everyone accounted for, but the weight of it stayed on me, like a hand pressed against the back of my neck. The second night, it got worse. I was making rounds. The place had this long corridor that led to the back cells. Nobody ever got put there anymore. They were older, smaller, and had plumbing issues. But regulations said we had to check them anyway, so I'd walk down with my flashlight, shine it into each empty space, and mark it in the log. That night, when I walked the corridor, I heard footsteps behind me. Not echoes, not mine. They were slower, heavier. I stopped and turned, expecting one of the inmates to be out of line. But the block was silent. Everyone in their cells. Some asleep, some staring at the ceiling like they always did. I told myself it was in my head. That the empty halls just played tricks when you were tired. But then when I reached the last unused cell, I froze. Because the door was closed. It had always been open. For years. The hinges were rusted so bad we never even bothered shutting it. But that night it was closed tight. And inside, I swear to you, I heard breathing. I didn't open it. Couldn't bring myself to. I walked back faster than I should have, my flashlight trembling in my hand. By the third night, the jail didn't feel like the same place anymore. The inmates had started whispering. That's what got to me most. I'd pass their cells and they'd be sitting on their bunks murmuring under their breath. But it wasn't the usual talk. Not the grumbling about food or the complaints about sleep. It was different, like they were whispering to someone else. Someone not in the room. I remember one inmate, a guy named Ray. He'd been in and out of our jail for years. A loudmouth, always gave the deputies hell. But that night, when I passed his cell, he was sitting cross-legged on the floor, whispering to the corner. His lips moving slow, like he was answering questions I couldn't hear. When I called his name, he didn't look at me. Didn't even blink. He just kept whispering. That was the first time I felt real fear working that place. Not nerves, not jumpiness, fear. By the fourth night, I stopped sitting at the desk altogether. I couldn't stand the feeling of being out in the open. Instead, I'd sit in the control room with the door locked, staring at the monitors. But even then, I wasn't safe. Because the cameras started showing things they shouldn't. Shadows moving across empty cells. Doors that looked closed when I knew I'd left them open. Once I swear I saw a figure standing under the hallway light. Just standing there. Tall. Still. But when I went to check, the hall was empty. I didn't sleep much that week. I couldn't. Every sound felt too close. Every creak of the building, every cough from the cells, every buzz of the light. It all worked on me, wearing me down. But the worst came on the fifth night. It was around 2 in the morning. The whole jail was still. I remember walking down toward the unused block again. I told myself I'd skip it, that it wasn't worth the nerves, but regulations were regulations. I had to check it, and when I got there, I saw something that's never left me. That same cell door, the one that had been shut, was open again. Not wide, but just enough to show darkness inside. And swinging from the ceiling was a rope, not new, old, frayed. The kind you'd expect to find in some barn, not a jail cell. And below it, on the floor, the dust was disturbed, like someone had been standing there. Like someone had dropped from it. I don't remember writing in the logbook after that. I don't remember finishing my rounds. I just remember sitting at the desk, staring at the clock until the morning relief came in. When the sheriff walked in, I handed him my badge and keys. I didn't even explain. He must have seen the look on my face because he didn't ask. That was my last shift. People sometimes ask me why I left. I tell them I was tired of the night work, that the pay wasn't worth it. They nod and move on, and I let them. But the truth is, I know what I felt in that place. I know what I saw. And I can't shake the thought that maybe the jail was never really empty at night. Maybe it still isn't. Because sometimes, when I drive past that old brick building on the edge of town, I swear I see a figure in the window, standing under the fluorescent light, waiting. I thought quitting would give me peace, but it didn't. For weeks after that last night, I couldn't sleep right. Every sound reminded me of that jail. The buzzing lights, the echo of footsteps in an empty hall, the way the air always felt a little too heavy. I'd wake up drenched in sweat, certain I'd hear a door clanging shut or a key ring rattling in the dark. I tried to convince myself it was stress, that I just needed time away. But the problem was the jail didn't stay away from me. It was maybe 2 months after I quit when I got a call from one of the deputies. A friend of mine, at least before all this. He said the sheriff wanted to see me. No explanation. Just told me to come by the office. I didn't want to go, but something in me, it pulled. Like unfinished business, so I went. The jail hadn't changed. Same squat brick building at the edge of town, same cracked parking lot. But the second I stepped inside, I felt it all over again. The air, that weight pressing down, like stepping into a memory that never really let go. The sheriff was waiting in his office. He didn't waste time with small talk. He slid the logbook across the desk toward me. "You kept this your last week," he said. I nodded. "Yeah, take a look." I opened the book, flipped through the pages. At first it seemed fine. My handwriting, neat rows of times and initials, just like I'd always done. But then I hit the middle of the week, and my chest went cold, because the entries were gone. Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, blank. It wasn't crossed out, wasn't ripped out, just never written. 3 whole nights erased, like they never happened. But I remembered them. God, I remembered. The whispers, the footsteps, that rope swinging in the empty cell. I looked up at the sheriff, but he just stared at me, waiting. Like he wanted me to explain. "I filled this," I said. My voice sounded weak even to me. "Every night. I logged everything. Not according to this," he said. I pushed the book back to him. My hands were shaking. Somebody's messing with it. Had to be. He leaned back in his chair, arms folded, watching me the way you watch someone you don't quite trust. "No one touched it," he said. "That book never left your desk." I wanted to argue, but the words wouldn't come. Because deep down I knew he was right. I never let that logbook out of my sight. I'd written in it every round, every hour. So why was it empty? The sheriff dismissed me after that. Said he just wanted me to see. I don't know what he was testing. If he thought I'd admit to slacking or lying or losing my mind. I left his office feeling worse than when I came in, but the book haunted me. That night I couldn't stop thinking about it. I sat at my kitchen table with a beer, staring at nothing, trying to remember each entry. I could see myself writing them. Midnight check. 1 a.m., 2, my pen scratching across the page, the clock ticking on the wall. But if I remembered it so clearly, why wasn't it there? The next day I drove back. Told myself I just needed one more look. Maybe the sheriff hadn't shown me everything. Maybe there was some mistake. The deputies gave me strange looks when I walked in, but no one stopped me. I went straight to the office, grabbed the logbook off the shelf. It was still empty, but this time, when I turned the pages, I noticed something else. At the very edges of the blank nights, faint impressions, like the ghost of writing that had been pressed hard enough to leave a mark on the paper below. I tilted the book toward the light, and there it was, faint outlines of words. Not mine, not any handwriting I knew. The letters were shaky, uneven, childlike almost. I traced one with my finger. It said, "He walked again." Another line, "Hanging, hanging, hanging," and on the last page of the missing nights. 3 words carved so deep they nearly tore through the paper. Still not enough. I slammed the book shut. My hands were slick with sweat. I should have left right then. Should have walked away and never looked back. But I didn't. Something in me needed answers, so I went to the block, the unused cells. I don't know what I thought I'd find. Proof that someone had been sneaking in, maybe. A reason for the rope, for the whispers, for the marks in the book. But when I walked down that corridor, it was the same as before. Dust on the floor, rust on the doors. Empty, except for that last cell, the one that had opened and shut on its own. This time, the door was wide open. I stood in the hall for what felt like forever, staring into the dark. My flashlight beam trembled as I lifted it, shining inside. And I swear to you, I saw words scratched into the wall, hundreds of them, over and over, gouged deep into the stone. Log the night, log the night, log the night. The letters crawled up the walls, across the ceiling, carved by some desperate hand. And below them, lying in the corner, was another logbook. Not ours, not regulation. This one was older, its cover cracked and moldy, pages curled with damp. I shouldn't have touched it, but I did. I picked it up and flipped it open. The handwriting was the same as the faint scrawls I'd seen in the official book. Childlike, uneven. And the dates inside, they were from decades ago. Page after page of the same words, walked again, hanging, not enough. I dropped it. Couldn't stand to hold it anymore. The sound echoed down the block, too loud, too sharp. And then, I heard it, breathing, from inside the cell. But I was standing in the doorway. There was nothing in front of me. The breathing grew louder, ragged, like someone with a rope tight around their throat. My legs locked up. My chest felt like it was caving in. I staggered back, dropped the flashlight, and ran. I didn't stop until I was in my car, driving fast, the jail shrinking in the rearview mirror. That was the last time I stepped inside. But the logbook never left me. I see those faint words every time I close my eyes. He walked again. Hanging, still not enough, and sometimes, when I wake in the middle of the night, I hear the scratch of a pen against paper. Slow, careful, logging the time. I don't know what's being written now. I don't want to. All I know is that somewhere in some book I'll never touch, my name is already there, logged, accounted for, and when the last page turns, it'll be my night missing from the record. It was my last night. I remember telling myself that over and over again, like a chant. One more shift, just one more, and then I was done. I'd put in my notice already. The sheriff knew, the deputies knew. I even told a couple of the inmates. Some of them laughed, said I wouldn't make it to sunrise. I tried to laugh back, but deep down I wondered if they were right. The night started the same as all the others. I did my first round, keys jangling, boots echoing on the concrete. Checked each block, each cell. The men were in their bunks, some pretending to sleep, some watching me with those tired, hollow eyes. I told myself to focus on the routine. That's what kept me steady. Count heads, check locks, make notes in the logbook, repeat until morning. But around midnight, something changed. I was sitting at the desk, drinking cold coffee, when I realized it was too quiet. Normally, you could hear at least something, snoring, coughing, somebody mumbling in their sleep. But that night, nothing. The silence felt heavy, like it was pressing down from the ceiling. I stood up, uneasy, and grabbed my flashlight. Walked down the main corridor. My boots sounded too loud, each step bouncing back off the walls. When I got to the first block, I froze. Every cell was empty. Bunks bare. No sheets, no bodies, nothing. Just cold iron bars and shadows. I thought maybe I'd wandered into the wrong block, but I knew these halls too well. I checked the next one. Same thing. Empty. By the third block, my chest was tight. My flashlight beam shook across walls that should have been lined with men, and still, nothing. I kept walking, faster now, checking each row. All the same. Cell after cell, silent and bare. But then I heard it. Breathing. It was faint, but it was there. Slow, steady, human breathing. It came from inside the cells. I shined my light through the bars, but there was no one. Just empty bunks. I pressed my ear closer. The sound grew louder. Dozens of lungs pulling in air, exhaling in unison. I stumbled back, my stomach turning. I knew what I was hearing. I'd heard those men breathe night after night. Some wheezed, some snored, some whistled through broken noses, and I swear to you I could hear each one, exactly where they should have been. But they weren't there. The cells stayed empty. I backed out of the block, but the sound followed me, growing louder. Now it wasn't just breathing. It was murmuring too. Words I couldn't make out, whispered in low voices, like the whole block was holding a conversation just under the surface. I yelled, told them to stop. My voice cracked, bouncing down the hall, but the whispers didn't stop. If anything, they grew closer. I started checking doors, convinced maybe they'd broken out somehow. But the locks were solid, heavy, untouched. I looked down the corridor, and for a moment I thought I saw them. Shapes behind the bars, faint outlines of men sitting on bunks, lying under blankets. hands gripping the metal, but when I blinked, they were gone. Only shadows remained. By now, my hands were shaking so bad I could barely hold the flashlight. I wanted to run, but where would I go? Out into the night, telling everyone the prisoners had vanished. Who would believe me? I forced myself back to the desk, sat down hard, trying to breathe, trying to steady myself. I told myself maybe I was overtired. Maybe my eyes were playing tricks, my ears filling in what wasn't there. But then I looked at the logbook. The page for that night was already filled in, line after line, in my handwriting, but I hadn't written it. AM, all present. 1 August AM, all present. 2 Zag AM, all present. The words were neat, too neat. My real handwriting had a slant, a hurried scratch to it. This was careful, deliberate, and at the bottom of the page a single sentence, final count complete. None remain. I shoved the book away. My heart hammered so hard I thought it would break my ribs. I don't know how long I sat there shaking. The whispers rose and fell around me, moving through the air like a tide. The breathing never stopped. Finally, I forced myself up. I had to see, had to check one more time. I walked the block again, shining my light through the cells. Still empty, but the whispers grew sharper, closer, until I could almost make out words. My name, I swear I heard my name. At the last cell, I stopped. My flashlight beam caught something carved into the wall above the bunk. A tally, dozens of lines scratched deep into the concrete. Counting days, maybe years, but the last mark was different. It was my initials, burned into the wall like they'd always been there. I stumbled back, my legs weak. My mouth was dry, my throat tight, and then I heard it, clear as day. A voice from inside the cell, not a whisper this time, not a murmur, just one word, low and certain, stay. I dropped the flashlight. The beam spun across the floor, caught on the bars, through shadows that looked like hands reaching out. I didn't stop to pick it up. I ran. I didn't log out. Didn't tell the sheriff. Didn't grab my things. I just ran into the night and never looked back. That was my last shift, but even now I can't shake it. I close my eyes and I hear them breathing. I hear them whispering in the dark, crowding around me, and sometimes when I wake up gasping, I swear I feel the cold iron of the bars against my skin. They were never gone. Not really, they're still there. Waiting in those cells, breathing, watching, counting the days. And one day soon, they'll count me among them.